You stand at the threshold of memory and cold, at the edge of a world that no longer exists except in the fragments we carry forward, in the stories we tell ourselves when the modern night grows too bright and we long for a darkness more honest, more complete. The year is 1873, and you are somewhere in the territories that will one day bear names you recognize, but tonight those names mean nothing. Tonight there is only the wind, the coming cold, and the small decisions that will determine whether you see another dawn. The sun has already begun its descent behind the ridge of mountains to the west, those ancient granite sentinels that have watched countless winters arrive and depart without concern for the brief lives that flicker in their shadows. You can feel the temperature dropping even now, even before full darkness arrives, the way it does in this high country where the air is thin and holds no mercy, no warmth once the sun withdraws its attention. The light that remains is pale gold fading to pewter, stretching long across the grassland that surrounds you, turning each blade and stem into a tiny shadow of itself. You are alone. This is the first truth you must accept, the foundational fact upon which everything else will rest. There is no one coming to help you, no rescue party aware of your location, no companion who might share the burden of the hours ahead. You are alone in a way that people in your other life, your modern life, rarely experience. Alone not just in the absence of company, but in the vast indifference of a landscape that does not care whether you survive, that will not mourn if you fail, that will simply continue its ancient rhythms whether you wake to see them or not. The cabin stands perhaps 30 yards ahead, a structure so modest you might have missed it entirely if you had not been searching, if desperation had not sharpened your eyes to notice the geometric regularity of its roofline against the organic chaos of the surrounding wilderness. It is not much to look at, this shelter you have found. The walls are rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, the whole edifice leaning slightly to the north as if tired from decades of resisting the prevailing winds. One window faces you, its single pane of glass somehow still intact despite the evident abandonment, catching the last of the light and throwing it back in a dull glimmer that seems less like welcome and more like warning. You do not know who built this place, or when, or why they left. These are mysteries the cabin keeps, and you have learned already that the Old West is full of such mysteries, full of questions without answers, full of absences where people used to be. Perhaps the builder succumbed to disease or accident. Perhaps they simply moved on seeking better land or richer prospects. Perhaps they are buried somewhere nearby under stones that have already begun to sink back into the earth. It does not matter now. What matters is that they built walls, that they constructed a roof, that they left behind this small bulwark against the infinite cold that is even now beginning to assert itself. Your breath has started to cloud before your face, faint wisps of vapor that appear and vanish, marking the rhythm of your respiration in visible form. This too is a reminder, a small proof of the physics that will govern this night. Your body is warm, the air is becoming cold, and the second law of thermodynamics cares nothing for your hopes or fears as it works ceaselessly to equalize the temperature, to draw the heat from your flesh and dissipate it into the vastness of the atmosphere. Without shelter, without fire, this process will continue until there is no difference left to measure, until you and the air have reached the same frigid equilibrium. But you are not without resources, not entirely. You have the clothes you wear, woolen trousers that smell of lanolin and would smoke, a cotton shirt beneath a vest of worn leather, a coat that has seen better days but still has most of its buttons and enough weight to blunt the worst of the wind. On your feet are boots, good ones, made by someone who understood that a person's survival might depend on the integrity of their footwear. They are scuffed and dusty now from the miles you have walked to reach this place, but the leather is still supple, the soles still thick. You have a hat wide-brimmed and stiff, that has kept the sun from your eyes during the day and will help hold what warmth you can generate close to your head when the true cold arrives. In your pockets and in the small canvas bag you carry slung across your shoulder, you have the other necessities, the small tools and materials that separate preparedness from folly. Matches, perhaps 24 of them, wrapped carefully in oilcloth to keep them dry. A knife, its blade worn thin from years of sharpening, but still capable of cutting kindling or rope, or the 100 other things a blade might be called upon to cut. A length of twine, a battered tin cup, a piece of hardtack wrapped in cloth, dense and uninviting but edible, caloric, fuel for the furnace of your metabolism. A handful of coffee beans, precious as currency in this time and place. A stub of candle. These objects have weight and substance. They are real. They may be enough. You begin walking toward the cabin, and the dried grass crunches softly beneath your boots, still frozen from the previous night, not yet thawed in the deepest shade where the sun did not penetrate even at its zenith. The sound is crisp and clean, almost pleasant, and it reminds you that you are still in the land of the living, still a participant rather than an observer, still capable of affecting the world around you even if only in the small way of crushing grass beneath your weight. Each step brings you closer to shelter, closer to the possibility of warmth, closer to the thin margin between discomfort and disaster. The air smells of sage and distance, of earth that freezes and thaws and freezes again, of pine sap from the scattered trees that dot the hillsides, of something else you cannot quite name, but that you have come to associate with altitude and isolation, with places where humans are scarce and the land still remembers what it was before we arrived. It is not an unpleasant smell, this scent of the high plains at the edge of winter. It is clean and sharp and honest. It does not promise anything. It simply is. As you draw nearer to the cabin, you begin to notice details that were invisible from a distance. The way the door hangs slightly askew on leather hinges that have dried and stiffened, the scatter of animal droppings near the base of the wall where something, deer perhaps or elk, has sheltered from the wind, the missing chinking between several of the logs where the mud has crumbled away and left gaps through which the weather can penetrate. You notice the stone chimney rising from the near end of the structure, its rocks fitted together with more care than you expected, its interior dark and inscrutable, impossible to assess from outside whether it is sound or blocked or crumbling. You reach the door and pause with your hand on the rough wood, feeling the splinters and grain beneath your palm, feeling the cold of the timber that has absorbed the chill of the fading day. For a moment you simply stand there, aware that you are about to cross a threshold, about to commit yourself to this shelter such as it is, about to trade the open uncertainty of the prairie for the contained uncertainty of this enclosed space. There is a finality to the gesture, an acknowledgement that you will not be traveling further today, that whatever this night holds, you will face it here. You push. The door resists, swollen in its frame or simply stubborn from disuse, and you must lean your weight against it, must force it inward with a grudging scrape of wood against earth. The interior exhales a breath of stale air, musty and cool but not frigid, not yet. The space inside is dim after the brightness of the evening sky, and you must wait while your eyes adjust, while the shapes within resolve themselves from shadow into substance. The cabin is a single room, perhaps 12 feet by 14, with a low ceiling crossed by rough beams that still show the marks of the axe that shaped them. The floor is packed earth, hard as concrete, swept clean at some point in the past, but now dusted with the debris of abandonment. Dried leaves that blew in through the gaps, small twigs, the desiccated remains of insects. Against the far wall stands a simple bed frame constructed of poles lashed together, its rope webbing sagging but intact, no mattress or bedding remaining. Near the fireplace is a crude table fashioned from split logs, one corner propped up on a stone where a leg has broken and been improvised. Two stumps serve as stools. On a shelf made from a single plank, you can see the abandoned possessions of the previous occupant. A chipped enamel plate, a rusted fork, a jar that might once have held preserves. There is something melancholy about these objects, these artifacts of ordinary life left behind when their owner departed for whatever reason, destined or chosen. They speak of meals eaten alone, of simple routines maintained in isolation, of a human presence that once animated this space and now is gone. You wonder if the person who sat on those stumps and ate from that plate was content here, or merely enduring, counting the days until they could leave for somewhere more hospitable, somewhere less austere. You will never know. The cabin keeps its secrets, but you are not here to dwell on ghosts or mysteries. You are here because the sun is setting and the temperature is dropping and you need shelter, need fire, need to survive the night that is coming. There will be time later, in the long hours of darkness, for contemplation and reflection. Now there is work to do, preparations to make, a sequence of tasks that must be completed before the last light fails entirely. You move to the fireplace and kneel before it, peering up into the chimney, squinting against the dim interior. You can see sky, a small circle of pale evening blue far above, which is good. It means the chimney is not blocked, means that smoke will have a path to escape, means that fire is possible. You reach up and run your hand along the inner wall of the flue, feeling the accumulation of soot and creosote, the rough stones, checking for looseness or obvious damage. Everything seems sound or sound enough. The hearth is littered with old ash, fine and gray and light, stirring slightly in the draft that moves down the chimney. Someone burned fires here once, many fires, and the ashes lain undisturbed since the last one went cold. Might have lain here for months or years, waiting for someone like you to arrive and begin the process again. You stand and turn your attention to the more immediate problem: fuel. A fire needs three things: heat, fuel, and oxygen. And you have the means to provide the first in the form of your matches, and the last is everywhere around you in the air itself. But fuel must be gathered, must be collected and prepared and arranged properly, or the whole enterprise will fail. You look around the cabin but find nothing useful. No forgotten stack of firewood left by the previous occupant, no convenient cache of kindling. Whatever wood was here has long since been burned or taken or scattered by time and weather. You will have to gather it yourself, and you will have to do so quickly, while enough light remains to see what you are collecting, to distinguish dead wood from living, dry branches from damp. You step back outside into the evening, and the cold strikes you immediately, noticeably colder than it was even 10 minutes ago when you entered. The sun has dropped below the mountains now, and though the sky remains bright, the direct warmth has been withdrawn, and the temperature is falling with the steady inevitability of a stone dropped into a well. There are trees scattered across the landscape, mostly juniper and pinyon pine, stunted and twisted by the constant wind, growing in clusters where the terrain offers some small protection or where water lies close beneath the surface. You make your way toward the nearest stand, perhaps 50 yards from the cabin, your eyes scanning the ground for fallen branches, for the pale gray of weathered deadwood against the darker earth and vegetation. You find your first piece almost immediately, a juniper branch as thick as your wrist and perhaps 3 feet long, its bark peeling away in strips, its wood beneath hard and dry. You pick it up and it is light, almost weightless, all the moisture long since evaporated, leaving only the cellular structure, perfect for burning. You tuck it under your arm and continue searching, moving slowly, methodically, gathering a second branch and a third, accumulating an armload of fuel. Not enough yet, but a beginning. The work is meditative in its way, this simple act of gathering, of selecting and collecting, of preparing for a basic need. There is no complexity to it, no ambiguity. You need fire. Fire needs wood. Wood must be gathered. The chain of necessity is clear and clean, and there is something almost comforting in that clarity, something that contrasts sharply with the complicated uncertainties of the modern world you know in another time, another life. Here, now, the requirements are stripped down to their essence. As you work, you become aware of the sounds of the evening settling around you. The wind in the grass, a constant whisper that rises and falls in waves, the distant call of a hawk circling somewhere above, the creak of tree branches rubbing against each other in the breeze. These sounds are layered over a deeper silence, the profound quiet of a place where human noise is absent, where there are no engines or voices or electronic hums, where the acoustic landscape is entirely natural, entirely itself. After a while you realize you can hear your own breathing, can hear the rustle of your clothing as you move, can hear the snap of dry twigs breaking under your hands. You make 3 trips between the trees and the cabin, carrying as much as you can hold each time, building a pile just inside the door where the wood will remain dry and accessible throughout the night. On your second trip you also gather smaller material, handfuls of dry grass, bark that crumbles into fibrous strands, tiny twigs no thicker than matchsticks. This will be your tinder and kindling, the material that will catch first from the flame of the match and burn hot and fast enough to ignite the larger pieces. Without this finer fuel, even the driest branches will resist ignition, will remain stubbornly inert while your precious matches burn down to nothing. By the time you have gathered what you judge to be enough wood to sustain a fire through the night, the light has faded to that peculiar luminosity of late dusk, where you can still see but must squint and strain, where colors have muted to shades of gray and the world has flattened into silhouettes and shadows. The air has grown colder still, and you can feel it now not just on your face but penetrating through your clothing, finding the gaps at your collar and cuffs, reminding you that wool and cotton and leather are merely delays, not solutions, that they slow but do not stop the transfer of heat from your body to the environment. You enter the cabin for the last time before committing to the night, pulling the door closed behind you, fighting it back into its frame until it seats with a decisive thud that seems too loud in the enclosed space. The darkness inside is nearly complete now, just the faintest gray light filtering through the window and the gaps in the chinking, barely enough to navigate by. You stand still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust again, letting the space settle around you, feeling rather than seeing the dimensions of the room, the placement of the furniture, the weight of the silence. Then you kneel before the fireplace and begin the careful work of building a fire, the work that will determine the character of the entire night ahead. You settle deeper into the wool blanket, pulling it up around your shoulders as the first true darkness gathers in the corners of the cabin. The fire has found its rhythm now, a steady consumption of split pine that fills the space with amber light and the clean, resinous smell of burning wood. You can feel the cold pressing against the outer walls, testing the chinking between the logs, searching for any gap or weakness it might exploit. The cabin holds, as it has held through other nights, other winters, but you can sense the cold's patient hunger, its willingness to wait. This is what the winter nights demanded here, in this high country of the Wyoming Territory in the year 1879. Not drama, not the sudden crisis that resolves in a handful of heartbeats, but this slow negotiation between warmth and cold, between the small sphere of human comfort you have carved out and the vast indifference that surrounds it. You have learned, in the months since you arrived in this place, that survival here is not about grand gestures or moments of courage. It is about 1,000 small attentions, a constant awareness of the delicate systems that keep you alive. The cabin measures perhaps 12 feet by 14, built of lodgepole pine chinked with mud and moss. The previous occupant, a trapper named Guthrie who moved on to the settlements near South Pass City, left it in decent repair, and you have spent the autumn making it better. You resealed the chinking on the north wall, where the prevailing winds come from. You fitted a leather hinge to the door, so it closes more tightly. You stacked firewood along the east wall until the pile reached almost to the ceiling, knowing that once the deep snows came, gathering wood would become difficult, then dangerous, then finally impossible for days at a stretch. Through the single window, real glass, a luxury that speaks to Guthrie's years of careful trade, you can see the darkness settling over the valley. The window faces south, away from the worst of the wind, and during the day it lets in enough light to make the cabin almost cheerful. Now it shows you only the last blue hour of twilight draining from the world. The mountains across the valley have become silhouettes, their peaks jagged against the sky. Snow covers their upper reaches, and you know that snow reaches down a little farther each night, tide of white moving inexorably toward the valley floor where you make your stand. You stand and move to the window, pressing your palm against the glass. The cold comes through immediately, sharp enough to make you pull your hand back after a moment. The glass is a single pane, perhaps 10 inches by 12, and you have hung a square of blanket on pegs above it that you can drop when the temperatures fall far enough that frost begins to form on the inside. For now, you leave it up. The last light matters, even this dim remnant of the day. Outside, the world is entering that particular stillness that comes with cold. No birds call. No wind moves through the branches of the pines that cluster near the cabin. The creek that runs 40 yards to the east, your source of water, and the reason this spot was chosen for a dwelling, makes no sound. You know it still runs. You checked it this afternoon, breaking the skim of ice along the edges to fill your buckets. But the cold muffles even moving water. You have lived other winters in other places. You remember winters in Ohio, where you were born, the snow deep but the cold somehow softer, gentler, and always the proximity of other people. Your family's farm was 2 miles from town, and even in the worst weather, you knew there were neighbors within walking distance, houses with lit windows and smoke rising from chimneys. You remember winters in Denver, where you spent 2 years working in a freight office after the war. The winter's hard, but the hardness diluted by the city, by hotels and churches and meeting halls, by the density of human activity that made the cold seem like an inconvenience rather than an adversary. This is different. The nearest other soul is Jim Cardwell, who works a small claim 7 miles down the valley, and you have not seen Jim since early November when he stopped by to trade coffee for tobacco and to tell you he was thinking of wintering in Lander, 30 miles to the southeast, where his sister kept a boarding house. You told him that sounded wise. You did not tell him you had already decided to stay, to see what a winter alone in this high country would teach you. The fire pops, sending a small shower of sparks against the stones you have arranged as a crude hearth. You turn from the window and tend to it, adding another split log, adjusting the others with the iron poker that Guthrie left behind. The poker is worn smooth in the handle from years of use, and you have come to appreciate its weight, its balance. Good tools become companions in a place like this. The poker, the axe with its hickory handle that you keep honed to a fine edge, the cast iron skillet that hangs from a peg near the fire. These things are not merely objects, but partners in the ongoing work of staying alive. You check your water. 2 wooden buckets sit near the door, both full. You filled them this afternoon, and will not need to go out again until morning. The water is clear and cold enough that you can feel it in your teeth when you drink. In another month, the creek will freeze solid in the shallows, and you will need to chop through ice to reach the water below. In 2 months, you will need to melt snow. But for now, the water runs and the buckets are full, and you count this as one of the many small securities that will see you through the night. Your supplies line the west wall of the cabin, stored in crates and sacks and barrels. Flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork, coffee, sugar, salt. Dried apples and peaches you purchased from a Mormon freighter in October. 3 pounds of tobacco. A bottle of whiskey you have promised yourself not to open except in an emergency, though you have not defined what would constitute such an emergency. Ammunition for the rifle that leans in the corner near your bunk. A Henry repeater that you bought used in Denver and that has proven reliable despite its age. Traps you have not yet set because you have been focused on preparing the cabin rather than working. Candles. A box of matches you guard as carefully as the ammunition. Needles and thread. A whetstone. A small bottle of laudanum, also reserved for emergencies. A book, Washington Irving's Tales of the Alhambra, that you have read 3 times already and expect you will read several more times before spring. These supplies represent months of wages from your time in Denver, careful planning, the advice of men who knew this country. Even so, you know they are barely adequate. You have enough to last the winter if you are careful, if nothing is lost or spoiled, if no disaster forces you to draw on reserves you have not accumulated. The margin is thin. This is one of the first truths of winter here. The margin is always thin. You settle back onto the stool near the fire, feeling the warmth begin to soak into your clothes, your skin. Your body is learning a new relationship with heat. In the settlements, in the places where people cluster together, warmth is a background condition, something noticed only in its absence. Here, warmth is a project, a temporary state you must constantly renew. When you wake in the night, and you will wake multiple times, because you have learned that you must feed the fire at least twice between midnight and dawn. The first thing you will feel is the cold pressing in, and the first thing you will do is reach for the woodpile and begin the process of pushing it back again. Your clothes carry the smell of wood smoke now, permanently, a scent that has worked its way into the fibers of the wool and cotton, and will not leave until you reach a place where clothes can be properly washed and aired. Your skin too, probably. You have become a creature of smoke and wool, and the particular stillness that comes from living alone in a small space. You notice that your movements have become more deliberate, more economical. There is no one to see you, no reason to hurry or perform. You move through the routines of survival with a kind of monastic precision. The light outside has gone almost completely now. Through the window, you can see the first stars beginning to emerge, hard points of light in a sky that seems to deepen even as you watch. On a clear night like this, the cold will intensify. Without clouds to hold the day's meager warmth, the temperature will drop steadily through the night, reaching its lowest point just before dawn. You have learned to read the sky the way sailors read the sea, understanding that each configuration of clouds and stars and moon implies a different kind of night, a different set of challenges. You stand again, movement is important, you have learned, keeping the blood flowing, and walk to the shelves Guthrie built into the south wall. Here you keep the smaller items, the things you need to access regularly. Tin plates and cups, a box of salt, a jar of grease for your boots, the book, a small wooden box that contains your personal items, a letter from your sister in Ohio, now 3 months old, a photograph of your parents, both gone, a pocket watch that belonged to your father, which you wind each night though there is no particular reason to track the hours with such precision. These objects anchor you to a life before this cabin, before this winter. You take them out sometimes, handling them gently, reminding yourself that you came from somewhere and, if you are careful and lucky, you will go somewhere again when the snows melt. But for now, there is only here. Only this cabin and this night and the many nights that will follow. You have made this choice deliberately, though you are still understanding why. Part of it was practical. You needed work and found it in the freight office, and when that work ended, you needed a next thing and heard about the trapping possibilities in this high country. But part of it was something else, something harder to name. A desire to test yourself against something fundamental. A need to step away from the noise and complication of other lives and see what remained when everything was stripped down to the basic work of staying warm and fed and alive. There were men who thought you were foolish. The owner of the freight office, when you gave your notice, told you that the mountains killed more people than the Indians ever had, and the Indians had killed plenty. Jim Cardwell, on his November visit, looked around the cabin and said, "It's tight enough, I suppose, but it's going to be a long goddamn winter in a box this small." He was not wrong. You know he was not wrong. But you also know that you needed this, whatever this turns out to be. You return to the fire and feed it again, though it does not really need feeding yet. You are learning the rhythm of it, the way the wood burns down, the point at which another log becomes necessary. Too much wood, and you waste your reserves, create heat you cannot use. Too little, and you risk letting the fire burn too low, the coals losing their critical heat. Fire management is perhaps the central skill of winter survival here, more important than tracking or shooting or any of the more dramatic abilities people associate with frontier life. The cabin is warm now, genuinely warm. The temperature in the center of the room probably near 60 degrees, luxurious by the standards you are developing. Near the walls it will be colder, and you know that by morning frost will have formed on the heads of the nails that protrude through the logs here and there, points where the cold outside finds a path inside. But in this sphere around the fire, in this column of heated air rising toward the roof, there is comfort. You prepare your evening meal, a simple affair. You swing the iron pot that hangs from a hook on a metal arm over the fire. Into the pot you place water from the bucket, dried beans you soaked this morning, a piece of salt pork the size of your fist, an onion from the small supply you keep in the coldest corner of the cabin. You stir it with a wooden spoon, then swing the pot directly over the flames where it will heat slowly. This pot will simmer for an hour, and the cabin will fill with the smell of the cooking food, and then you will eat directly from the pot, sopping up the liquid with cornbread you baked yesterday. While the pot heats, you attend to other small tasks. You check the door again, pressing on it to make sure it is fully closed, that the leather latch is caught. You adjust the blanket curtain that you have hung across the corner where you sleep, a tiny room within the room that will hold warmth a little better than the open space. You check your boots, which sit near the fire drying from this afternoon's walk to the creek. Wet boots are not merely uncomfortable here, they are dangerous. Frozen feet can kill you as surely as a fall or a bullet, and the killing is slower and more terrible. These tasks are small, repetitive, perhaps even tedious, but they are also essential, and you have come to find a kind of meditation in them. Each task completed is a small victory against the cold, against entropy, against the tendency of systems to fall apart when left untended. You understand now, in a way you did not when you arrived in September, that this is what survival looks like in a place like this. Not dramatic rescues or bold strokes, but simply paying attention, over and over, to the 1,000 details that matter. The pot begins to steam, and the smell of the salt pork spreads through the cabin. Your stomach responds immediately. You have been burning calories all day in the work of living here, and your body has learned to anticipate this evening meal as the major event of your day. You will eat well tonight, perhaps too well, because you know that tomorrow you need to be more disciplined, to stretch your supplies further. But tonight you are hungry and the food is cooking and the cabin is warm, and these facts seem like enough. Outside, full darkness has arrived. If you were to step out now, and you will not, there is no reason to waste the warmth you have built up inside. You would find a world transformed. The darkness in this country, far from any town or city, is almost complete. On a cloudy night, you would barely be able to see your hand in front of your face. On a clear night like this, the stars provide just enough light to see shapes, shadows, the outlines of the pines and the mountains beyond. The Milky Way stretches overhead, a river of light that the ancients took for the path of spirits. You have spent clear nights standing outside, staring up at that abundance of stars, feeling very small and very temporary. But you are not outside. You are inside in your cabin, with your fire and your food and your carefully assembled supplies. You are as safe as a person can be in this country in this season. The thought is both comforting and unsettling. Safe, yes, but also alone in a way that you have never been alone before. If something goes wrong, an injury, an illness, a fire that spreads beyond the hearth, there is no one to help. You are the only intelligence, the only will, the only pair of hands for miles in any direction. This solitude has a weight to it. You feel it most in the evenings, after the work of the day is done and there is nothing left but to sit by the fire and wait for sleep. In town, in the world of other people, evenings were social times. Conversations, entertainments, the simple presence of others. Here, there is only you and your thoughts and the sounds of the cabin settling around you. You have discovered that your mind, left to itself, is a stranger and more active thing than you realized. Memories surface without invitation. Conversations replay themselves, often with you imagining different things you might have said, better responses, wittier replies. You find yourself talking aloud sometimes, narrating your actions. Now I'll check the door. Now I'll add wood to the fire. As if there were an audience, as if the silence needed to be filled. You catch yourself doing this and stop, but an hour later you are doing it again. You wonder if this is what happened to Guthrie, if this is why he left. Not the cold or the work or the danger, but the solitude, the long nights with only yourself for company. When he stopped by in August to show you the cabin and negotiate the few items he would leave behind, he seemed friendly enough, voluble even, talking steadily about the country and the trapping and the peculiarities of the weather at this elevation. But you noticed that he talked too much, too fast, as if making up for months of silence. And when you mentioned that you planned to winter here alone, he gave you a long look and said, "Well, it's your life to live." Not quite approval, not quite warning. The stew is ready now, the beans soft, the pork falling apart. You take the pot from the fire using a leather pad to protect your hand from the hot iron handle, and you set it on the floor near your stool. You take the cornbread from the shelf, breaking off a piece. You eat slowly, using the cornbread to scoop the beans and pork from the pot, chewing thoroughly, making the meal last. Food is fuel here, but it is also entertainment, a marker of time, a small pleasure in a day that offers few. The warmth of the food spreads through you, and you feel your body relax in a way it has not since morning. This is one of the gifts of the evening meal, this sense of things accomplished, of having earned rest. You have made it through another day. You have kept the fire burning and fetched water, and maintained your small human island in the midst of a vast inhuman landscape. Tomorrow you will do it again, and the day after that, through however many days it takes for winter to exhaust itself and withdraw. You finish eating and set the pot aside to cool. You will wash it in the morning, using a little of the precious water and some sand from the box you keep for this purpose. For now you are done with tasks. The fire is built up, the door is sealed, your belly is full. There are several hours yet before you will sleep. You have learned to stay up until you are truly tired, because if you lie down too early you will wake in the deepest part of the night and lie there cold and restless until dawn. You take the book from the shelf and settle back onto the stool, angling it so the firelight falls across the pages. You have read these stories before, these tales of Moorish Spain, of the Alhambra Palace and its legends. But they are good stories, and the act of reading, of following sentences, of inhabiting a world constructed of words, is a way of escaping this cabin without leaving it. You read slowly, sometimes aloud, listening to the sound of your own voice in the space. Washington Irving wrote these tales after his own time in Spain, in a palace that was already a ruin, haunted by the ghosts of its former grandeur. He wrote about hot sun and intricate tiles and fountains playing in courtyards, a world as far from this Wyoming winter as you can imagine. Perhaps that is why you chose this book, why you carried it all the way from Denver. It is a door into warmth, into complexity, into a place where cold is not the dominant fact of existence. Outside, something moves. You hear it before you see it, a soft sound, almost like a breath. You set the book down and move to the window. At first you see nothing, just darkness and the dim shapes of trees. Then movement again, and you make out the form of a deer, a doe, picking her way through the snow near the cabin. She moves cautiously, ears forward, pausing every few steps to test the air. She is perhaps 20 feet from your window, close enough that you can see the vapor of her breath. You stand very still, watching. The doe continues her careful progress, moving from the cover of one tree to another. She is looking for food. You realize the bark of the aspens, the twigs of the willows that grow along the creek. Winter diet for deer, sparse and barely adequate. You know that many of them will not survive until spring, that the cold and the scarcity will take a percentage of the herd, the old and the young and the unlucky. The doe stops, looking directly at your window. For a moment, you wonder if she can see you, if the firelight inside makes you visible to her. But then she looks away, untroubled, and continues on. In a few moments, she has disappeared into the darkness, leaving only tracks in the snow that you will see in the morning. You return to your stool, to your book, but you find it harder to concentrate now. The deer has reminded you of the world outside, of the other lives that are also negotiating this winter, also making their small stands against the cold. In the forests around this cabin, deer and elk are yarding up in sheltered valleys. Coyotes are hunting, their winter coats thick against the cold. Rabbits are huddled in burrows beneath the snow. Each creature following its own strategies, its own ancient patterns of survival. And in the distant settlements, Lander, South Pass City, the ranches scattered along the Green River. Other people are also spending this night, also tending their fires and eating their meals and preparing for sleep. You think about them sometimes, these people you do not know, imagining their lives. A family in a ranch house, children being put to bed. A merchant in town, counting the day's meager winter receipts. A rancher checking on cattle in a barn, making sure they have fodder and water. Lives connected in ways yours is not, lives that unfold in proximity to other lives. You chose this solitude, you remind yourself. You wanted to know what it would be like to spend a winter alone, to be responsible only to yourself. And there is something valuable in it, something clarifying. The distractions fall away. The compromises you make in the presence of others, the performances, the small deceptions, none of that is necessary here. You can be exactly yourself, whatever that turns out to mean. But the solitude is also hard, harder than you expected. The silence has a pressure to it. Your thoughts circle and return, finding the same grooves, the same worries. You find yourself conducting imaginary conversations, arguments you win decisively because the other person exists only in your mind. You find yourself remembering people you have not thought of in years, incidents that seemed inconsequential at the time, but that now, revisited in the stillness, reveal new dimensions, new meanings. The fire needs attention again. You set aside the book and add wood, 2 logs this time, building it up for the long stretch of night ahead. The flames climb the new wood, filling the cabin with fresh light. You watch the fire for a while, letting your mind quiet, following the patterns of flame and ember. Fire is perhaps the oldest human comfort, older than houses or agriculture or writing. Your ancestors, back through time beyond counting, sat in front of fires like this, watching the same dance of light and shadow, feeling the same warmth pushing back the same cold. You prepare your bed, such as it is. A wooden frame built into the corner of the cabin, a mattress of pine boughs covered with a canvas tarp, and then 2 wool blankets. Your bedroll on top of that, another blanket, and the buffalo robe you traded for in Lander, heavy and warm. In this layered nest, with the fire built up and the door sealed, you will sleep well enough. You will wake when the fire burns down and the cold begins to seep in, and you will get up and feed the fire and then return to bed. This pattern will repeat twice, perhaps 3 times before dawn. It is not restful in the way sleep in a settled house is restful, but it is adequate, and adequacy is all you require. Before you lie down, you perform one last circuit of the cabin. You check the fire again, making sure the logs are settled and will not roll. You check the door, pressing on it with your shoulder. You check the window, the blanket curtain ready to drop if the temperature falls far enough. You check the water buckets, the food stores, the rifle in its corner. Everything is as it should be. Everything is in its place. You wind your father's watch, listening to the small clicks of the mechanism. The watch face shows 11 o'clock, which seems right though you have no way to confirm it. Time has become a looser concept here. The sun rises and sets, the fire needs feeding, your stomach tells you when to eat. Clock time, the precise hours and minutes that governed your life in Denver, matter less. What matters is the rhythm of the day, the cycle of tasks, the slow turning of light to dark to light again. You blow out the candle you lit when the last daylight faded. The cabin is illuminated now only by the fire, a warm orange glow that pushes the shadows back to the corners and the ceiling. You remove your outer shirt and your boots, but you keep your wool pants and your inner shirt on. Sleeping in your clothes seems strange at first, but you have learned that the effort of getting dressed when you wake to tend the fire in the deep night is too much, the cold too immediate. Better to stay mostly dressed, ready to move when movement is needed. You climb into your bed, pulling the blankets and the buffalo robe over you. The bed smells of pine and wood smoke and your own body, not unpleasant. You arrange yourself on your side, your back to the wall, facing the fire. This position allows you to watch the flames, to judge when they are burning low. It also feels safer, somehow, having the wall at your back and the rest of the cabin visible in front of you. The warmth from the fire reaches you here, just barely. Your face is warm, your hands where they rest outside the covers. Under the blankets, Your body's heat is trapped and held, creating a small climate that has nothing to do with the temperature in the rest of the cabin. You feel the weight of the buffalo robe, heavy and reassuring. You feel your muscles beginning to relax, the tension of the day draining away. This is the last good moment of the day, this settling into sleep while the fire still burns bright. Soon you will drift off, and the night will unfold in its own rhythm, and you will wake and tend the fire and return to sleep, over and over until morning. But for now, you are awake and warm and safe, and the night, despite its cold and its darkness and its indifference, is held at bay. You close your eyes, listening to the fire, to the small sounds of the cabin settling, to your own breathing growing slower and deeper. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own tasks. But tomorrow is not yet here. For now, there is only this moment, this warmth, this hard-won and temporary comfort. For now, it is enough. The wind finds every seam in the boards. You notice this now, lying on your side on the straw tick, one blanket pulled to your chin, the other folded beneath you for insulation from the floor. The cabin breathes with the prairie, expanding slightly in the relative warmth of your fire, contracting when a gust presses against the north wall. Each board speaks in its own voice, a whistle here, a low moan there, a papery rattle where the chinking has dried and pulled away from the wood. You have learned these sounds over the past hours, can distinguish the honest structural complaints from the ones that might mean trouble, a loosening nail or a gap widening enough to let the cold pour through in earnest. Your body has found a position that minimizes discomfort, knees drawn up, one arm tucked against your chest, the other folded beneath your head as a supplemental pillow to the flour sack stuffed with prairie grass that serves the purpose. The straw beneath you is compressed where your hip and shoulder rest, and you know that in another hour you will need to shift to give those pressure points relief, but for now the position holds. Your feet, still wrapped in the extra wool, have stopped their aching transition from cold to warm and settled into a steady, manageable temperature. Not comfortable, precisely, but no longer demanding your constant attention. The fire has become your clock, your companion, your small orange world within the larger darkness. You have fed it twice more since your last round of night chores, each time rising with the particular stiffness that comes from lying still in cold air, each time moving through the careful sequence. Check the current state of the coals, select appropriate pieces from your dwindling indoor supply, place them with consideration for airflow and flame spread. Wait to ensure they catch before returning to your blankets. The ritual has become automatic, a dance you perform half awake, and each time you return to your spot on the floor you carry a little of the fire's warmth in your clothes, a temporary gift that fades slowly as you settle back into stillness. You think about the people who have done this before you, and you realize now, with the particular clarity that comes in deep night, that you are not thinking about abstraction or history, but about actual individuals, particular human beings who lay in similar darkness, who felt similar cold, who watched similar fires burn down and built them up again. The thought is not new. You have had versions of it throughout this long night, but it arrives now with a different quality, more personal, less philosophical. These were not frontier archetypes or historical categories, but people with specific faces, particular voices, individual memories of warmth and cold, comfort and hardship. You imagine a woman, perhaps 30 years old, lying not far from where you lie now, though the cabin would have been different, located elsewhere on this vast plain, oriented toward a different compass point, but subject to the same essential forces. She would have come here with a husband, most likely, perhaps from Ohio or Missouri or Pennsylvania, drawn by the Homestead Act's promise of land for those willing to work it. 160 acres free, or nearly free, a filing fee, a requirement to improve the land, 5 years of residence to prove up the claim. The opportunity would have seemed immense to people who had worked others' land, who had seen ownership as forever beyond their reach. And so they came, thousands of them, tens of thousands, in the years after the Civil War, in the decades that followed, wave after wave of hopeful families moving into country that offered everything except ease. She would have arrived in summer, almost certainly, when the grass was high and green, when the prairie showed its kindest face. They would have lived in a wagon at first, or a tent, while the husband, his name might have been John or William or Henry, something solid and common, broke sod and began the cabin. The first cut of prairie sod would have been the hardest. The roots of big bluestem and switchgrass wove together into a mat so tough it dulled plow blades. A natural fabric that had held this soil in place for thousands of years. They called it breaking for good reason. It was not mere plowing but a fundamental rupture. a violent beginning to agricultural life. The cabin they built, we might as well say her name was Sarah, or Margaret, or Catherine, one of the common names carried west from eastern states. The cabin would have been smaller than this one, probably a single room perhaps 12 feet by 14, the walls made from whatever timber they could find or afford. If they had money for milled lumber, they were fortunate. More likely they built with cottonwood logs from a creek bottom, or bought rough-cut boards from a speculator's steam mill. Or even, if they settled in the truly treeless regions, built walls from the same sod they had broken, stacking the heavy bricks of earth and grass roots in overlapping courses, creating a structure that was dark and close but remarkably well insulated, proof against wind and fire both. She would have made a home of it, this woman you imagine, because that was the work assigned and accepted. She would have sewn curtains from flour sacks, the way you have heard women did, bleaching out the mill's label and dyeing the fabric with walnut hulls or pokeweed or indigo if they had any. She would have arranged their few possessions, a trunk from home, a table and chairs if they were lucky, crates and barrels serving as furniture if they were not, to create some sense of order, some echo of domestic life as she had known it in whatever town or farm she had left behind. And when winter came, that first winter, she would have learned what you are learning now, that the prairie gives and the prairie takes away, that beauty and hardness are not opposites but companions here, two aspects of a single truth. How did she endure the nights? You wonder this with genuine curiosity, not academic interest but practical fellow feeling. Did she lie awake as you are lying awake, listening to wind and fire, measuring the slow hours until dawn? Or did exhaustion take her under quickly, the hard physical labor of frontier life? Hauling water, tending stock, cooking over an open hearth, washing clothes in heated water carried from a well or creek, leaving her so depleted that sleep came regardless of cold or discomfort. Both probably. Some nights one way, some nights another, depending on what the day had held, what worries occupied her mind, whether her body was well or fighting some small illness, whether she was carrying a child or recovering from birth or grieving one lost. The fire pops, a sharp report that pulls you out of speculation and back into your own particular moment. A pocket of moisture in the wood has superheated and burst, sending a small shower of sparks up the chimney and one glowing fragment onto the hearthstones, where it winks orange for a moment before fading to gray. You watch it die, this tiny event, and feel obscurely grateful for it, for the way it has returned you to the present, to the actual experience you are having rather than the imagined experience of someone long gone. But the imagining has changed something, has made the night feel less solitary. You are alone in this cabin, yes, genuinely alone in a way that is increasingly rare in modern life, with no other human within calling distance, no phone to reach for, no light switch to banish darkness. But you are not alone in having been alone here. The ground beneath this floor has supported others in their solitude, countless others across the span of years when this land was being transformed from prairie to property, from open range to fenced homesteads, from territory to state. Your experience tonight is yours, specific and unrepeatable, but it is also one instance of a pattern repeated so many times that the pattern itself becomes a kind of presence, a ghost of accumulated experience hanging in the cold air. You shift position now, carefully, drawing your lower leg forward to relieve the pressure on your hip, tucking the blanket more securely around your shoulders where it has loosened. The straw rustles beneath you, and you smell its dusty sweetness, the scent of dried grass that is one of the fundamental smells of agricultural life, familiar to humans for 10,000 years, since the first deliberate planting of grain. Someone on this prairie would have known that smell intimately. In their mattress, yes, but also in their barn, their haystack, their fields at harvest time. Wheat and oats and barley, the prairie's native grasses domesticated elsewhere and imported here, along with corn that the indigenous peoples had cultivated for centuries before European contact, all of it smelling of sun and growth and the earth's patient fertility. The cultivation of this land was not a simple story of progress, you know this. You have read enough, heard enough, understand enough to know that the farming frontier represented opportunity for some and dispossession for others, that the free land of the Homestead Act was free only because it had been taken, through treaties and wars and forced removals, from the peoples who had lived here for generations beyond counting. The great bison herds that had sustained the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, Comanche, Kiowa, and other Plains nations were deliberately destroyed, reduced from tens of millions to near extinction in the space of 2 decades. Their destruction a military strategy designed to make the nomadic hunting life impossible. to force indigenous peoples onto reservations and open the land for agricultural settlement. You do not shy away from this knowledge as you lie here in the darkness. To endure this night honestly means holding multiple truths at once. That the people who settled here were often desperately poor, seeking survival and modest prosperity, worthy of respect for their endurance and labor, and that the system that brought them here was built on violence and displacement, on the destruction of existing ways of life that were sustainable and rich in their own terms. Both things are true. The homesteader's hardship does not erase the prior inhabitants' dispossession. The injustice of colonization does not negate the genuine suffering of those who froze and starved and struggled on these isolated claims. The night holds these contradictions without resolving them, and so do you lying quiet, thinking slow thoughts that circle and return, that examine and release. This is part of what the darkness offers. You realize space for complexity, for thoughts that do not rush toward conclusion but rest in ambiguity, in the acknowledgement that history is not simple, that landscapes carry multiple stories, that the ground beneath you has supported both profound loss and hard-won survival. The wind strengthens for a spell, and you hear it coming across the prairie before it hits the cabin, a rushing in the grass like distant water. When it strikes the walls, the whole structure trembles slightly, and the fire bends sideways in the hearth, pressed down by the sudden change in draft. You tense without meaning to, some animal instinct responding to the building's shudder, then relax as the gust passes and the cabin settles back into its usual complaints. The fire recovers, flames straightening, and you exhale slowly, consciously easing the tension in your shoulders. This is the work of the night. You see it clearly now. Not merely staying awake or even staying warm, but maintaining equilibrium, finding the sustainable middle path between alertness and rest, between tending your needs and conserving your energy. You cannot sleep deeply, not with the fire to maintain and the cold waiting to pour in through any gap. But you cannot stay fully alert either, cannot spend 12 hours in vigilant tension without exhausting yourself. So you have found, almost without realizing you were looking for it, a state between states, a half-waking condition in which you are present but not striving, aware but not anxious, responsive to what the night requires but not anticipating disaster. The homesteaders would have learned this too, those who survived. The first winter would have been the teacher, harsh and unforgiving, sorting the adaptable from the rigid, the resilient from the brittle. Some families left after that first winter, admitted defeat, returned east or moved to town or tried their luck elsewhere. No shame in that. The attrition rate was high, claims abandoned, cabins left to weather into ruin. But others stayed, learned the rhythms, adapted their expectations, and found ways to survive what the prairie offered. They became what the land required them to become, or they left, and in time the land filled with the descendants of those who had learned to endure. You wonder what lessons you are learning tonight, what adaptations you are making that you might not even recognize until later, in retrospect. Patience, certainly. You have had to learn patience with the fire, with the cold, with the slow passage of time, with your own discomfort. Humility, perhaps. There is no room for arrogance in a situation this stripped down, where your survival depends on simple things done adequately, where the most basic necessities become difficult and consuming. Respect, definitely, for those who did this not for one night but for months, not as an experiment but as their life, not with the knowledge that dawn would bring relief and return, but with the understanding that dawn would simply bring the next day's work, that the cycle of seasons would turn and winter would come again. The fire needs attention. You know this not from any alarm, but from the quality of light in the room, the way the shadows have softened, the way the heat reaching your face has diminished slightly. You push back the blanket and rise, moving through the now familiar sequence of stiff joints protesting and cold air enveloping you. The floor is frigid against your wool-wrapped feet. You move to the hearth, squat before it, assess the coals. The larger pieces have burned down to geometric shapes, glowing orange fissured with black, still producing heat, but needing fuel to rebuild the flame. You select 2 pieces from the indoor stack, place them carefully, watch as the heat begins to work on them, as small flames explore their surfaces, finding purchase in bark and rough grain. The wood is cottonwood, you think, light and quick burning, not the best firewood but common along prairie watercourses, what people used because it was what grew here. Oak and hickory would burn longer and hotter, but oak and hickory belonged to other landscapes, to the eastern forests the settlers had left behind. Here you burned cottonwood and willow and whatever other wood you could find or trade for, and you burned it in quantity because it did not have the density of hardwoods, did not pack the same heat into each piece. The flames catch and spread, and you stay squatting there for a moment longer, hands extended toward the heat, absorbing warmth into your palms and fingers. The firelight flickers across the cabin walls, animating the rough surfaces, making the shadows dance and shift. For just this moment, tending fire in a dark cabin on a cold night, you are doing exactly what countless humans have done across millennia, performing one of the most ancient of human tasks, and the knowledge of that continuity is oddly comforting. The specifics change, the cabin's construction, the source of the wood, the reason for being here, but the fundamental act remains: keeping fire, holding back cold, making it through the night. You rise and return to your blankets, carrying that sense of continuity with you, letting it settle over you like an extra layer of warmth. The cabin is just a cabin again, your discomfort just discomfort, but both feel slightly less isolating than they did before, connected now in your mind to a long chain of similar moments, similar struggles, similar small victories of endurance. The hours continue their slow procession. You lose track of time in any precise sense. You have no clock, no watch, no phone to check, and fall instead into measuring by the fire's cycles, by the patterns of your own discomfort and small relief. The cold has settled deep now, not the shocking cold of early evening, but a persistent, penetrating chill that seems to come not just from the air but from the earth itself, from the vast reservoir of frozen ground that begins inches below the cabin floor and extends down through soil and clay and stone. You imagine the frost line moving deeper as winter progresses, the zone of frozen earth thickening, the cold spreading downward like roots, anchoring winter to the prairie's bones. But even in the depth of this cold, even in the darkest hours, you do not feel afraid. Uncomfortable, yes. Tired, certainly. Eager for dawn, absolutely. But not afraid. You have learned that the night is not malevolent, not actively hostile, merely indifferent. The cold does not seek you out. It simply is a condition of this place and time, something to be managed rather than fought. And you are managing it, adequately if not comfortably, keeping the fire fed, keeping your body protected, riding out the hours with the patience that is becoming, through necessity, your dominant virtue. You think about the difference between hardship and danger, a distinction that has clarified itself in your mind as the night has worn on. You are experiencing hardship, real discomfort, genuine challenge, the kind of difficulty that tests patience and physical endurance. But you are not in danger, not really. You have enough fuel to last the night, enough clothing to prevent frostbite, enough experience now to know what needs doing and how often. If you were truly in danger, if the temperature had dropped to 30 or 40 below, if you had inadequate clothing or insufficient fuel, if illness or injury had compromised your ability to tend the fire, then the equation would be different. Hardship would tip into genuine peril, the kind that killed people on this frontier with grim regularity. The historical record is full of such deaths. Families caught in blizzards between house and barn, freezing to death within yards of shelter. Children lost in whiteouts, found frozen days later. Lone travelers who misjudged distances or weather, whose bodies were discovered when the snow melted. Winter on the plains was a serious adversary, not to be underestimated or taken lightly. The settlers knew this, respected it, took precautions, stringing ropes between buildings to serve as guides in blinding snow, storing supplies against the possibility of being trapped indoors for days, teaching children to stay put if caught in a storm rather than try to walk home. You have read accounts written by those who lived through prairie winters, and certain details have stayed with you. The way snow could drift so high it covered fences and houses, turning the landscape into an undifferentiated white expanse where familiar landmarks disappeared and proportions became impossible to judge. The way the wind could drive snow through the smallest cracks, creating drifts inside houses, forcing people to hang blankets over doors and windows, to live in dimness rather than let the cold pour in. The way animals could freeze standing up, cattle in fields, chickens on their roosts, if the temperature dropped fast enough and low enough. The way water would freeze in buckets beside the fire, ice forming even in the so-called warm zone of the cabin. Your fire has not let water freeze. The bucket you filled earlier still shows liquid when you check it, though the surface is cold enough that your finger aches when you dip it in to test. The cabin is holding somewhere above freezing, you estimate, perhaps 10 degrees above, maybe 15 in the zone nearest the hearth. Not comfortable, but viable. Enough. You find yourself thinking about the word enough, turning it over in your mind the way you have turned your body through the long night, examining it from different angles. Enough firewood, enough clothing, Enough shelter. The frontier demanded that people recalibrate their sense of enough, that they learn to distinguish between necessity and luxury, between what they genuinely needed and what they had grown accustomed to having. Many failed at this recalibration, brought expectations that the prairie could not meet, and suffered proportionally. Others adapted, learned to find satisfaction in sufficiency rather than abundance, discovered that enough could be, if not comfortable, then at least adequate for survival. You are learning this too, in your small way, in this single night. You had wanted the cabin to be warmer, the bed to be softer, the hours to pass more quickly. But you are discovering that what you have is enough. Not what you would choose if choice were unlimited, but enough for the task at hand, sufficient to see you through. There is a lesson in this, something about the difference between wants and needs, between comfort and capability, but you are too tired to articulate it clearly, can only feel it as a kind of pressure in your thoughts, something important that will become clearer later, after sleep, after return to ordinary life. The wind has steadied into a constant push from the northwest, no longer gusting but maintaining pressure, and you hear the prairie singing under it, a vast susurration of grass against grass, stem against stem. Even in winter the grass is there, dormant but present, bent but not broken, waiting for spring to green it again. The people who lived here had to learn to see beauty in this spare landscape, to find satisfaction in horizontal distances and subtle colorations, in the play of light across grass, in the drama of storms moving across open sky. For those accustomed to trees and hills, to landscapes with vertical variation and intimate scale, the prairie could feel overwhelming, even frightening, in its emptiness and exposure. Some never made the adjustment. You have read letters and diary entries from homestead women particularly, describing loneliness and depression, the feeling of being watched by an empty sky, the way the wind never stopped, the way the isolation pressed in. "I am alone all day and most of the night," one woman wrote, her husband away working for wages to keep the homestead going. "The baby is my only company, and some days I do not speak a word aloud except to him. I watch the grass and the sky and I wait for something to happen, but nothing does. This is not the life I imagined." But others found something else here, some quality that answered something in them. "The sky is so vast," another woman wrote, "that I feel I can breathe fully for the first time. In the city I always felt confined, pressed upon. Here there is room for thought, for the mind to stretch. I do not mind the loneliness. I find it peaceful." Both responses were valid, you think. The prairie was what it was. People's reactions to it revealed as much about themselves as about the land. You are finding tonight that you are somewhere between those responses. You do not love this cold or this discomfort, would not choose to repeat it indefinitely. But neither do you hate it. There is something clarifying about it, something that strips away the unnecessary and leaves you with essentials. Warmth, shelter, the simple fact of being alive through the slow turn of hours. You cannot distract yourself with screens or books or music, cannot escape into entertainment or busyness. You can only be here, present with cold and fire and darkness, attentive to the basic requirements of survival. Is this better than modern life, with its comforts and conveniences? You do not think so. Is it worse? Not that exactly either. It is different, a different set of challenges and rewards, a different balance of comfort and hardship. And experiencing it, even briefly, even artificially, gives you a lens through which to see both past and present more clearly, to understand what was lost when these conditions were surpassed, and what was gained. The fire needs feeding again. You tend it, return to your blankets. The night is very deep now, the hours between midnight and dawn, when the world seems to hold its breath, when even the cold feels less active, more like a state of being than a process. You close your eyes, not to sleep but to rest them, and behind your eyelids you see the fire's afterimage, orange and dancing, a phantom warmth in the darkness. Time passes in its patient way, and you pass through it, enduring, witnessing, learning what you came here to learn. That the past was real, that its hardships were actual, that the people who lived through them were neither superhuman nor pitiable but simply human, adapting as humans do, finding the strength that circumstances required. You are finding that strength too, in your limited way, and in the finding you are touching something larger than yourself, some continuity of human experience that connects you backward through generations to people who faced this same darkness, this same cold, and made it through to morning. The night holds you, and you hold yourself steady in its grasp, and the hours continue their slow unwinding toward the east, toward dawn, toward light. The cold has settled into your bones now, not as shock but as a slow companion, And you understand that this sensation, this deep, marrow-level chill, is something the people of this place carried with them through entire seasons. You shift your weight on the wooden chair, feeling the grain of the seat through your trousers, and the small movement sends a faint creak into the quiet. The fire has burned down to a bed of coals that glow like eyes in the darkness, pulsing with each breath of air that seeps through the cabin's gaps. And you realize you have been watching those coals for some time without thought, lost in the hypnotic rhythm of their fading and flaring. Outside, the wind has changed its voice. Where before it howled and pressed against the walls with urgent fury, now it moves in long, drawn exhalations, as though the storm itself has grown tired and speaks in a lower register. You can hear the snow still falling, not see it, but hear it, a whisper against the window glass, against the roof, a sound so soft it exists at the very edge of perception. It is the sound of accumulation, of the world being slowly buried, and you know without looking that by morning the landscape will have transformed entirely, erased and rewritten in white. The woman across from you has not spoken in many minutes. Her hands rest folded in her lap, and her gaze has turned inward, focused on something you cannot see. The lines around her eyes and mouth are deeper in this light, carved by years of squinting into sun and wind, of smiling sparingly, of holding words behind pressed lips when speaking would cost more than silence. You have learned over these hours that silence here is not empty but full, that these people understood the weight and substance of quiet, knew how to listen to what moves beneath words. You think of the town beyond these walls, the collection of structures huddled together against the immensity of the land. Earlier, before full darkness descended, you walked those few streets with your escort, the schoolteacher who brought you to this threshold and then departed to his own cold rooms. The town had been nearly deserted, just a few figures moving quickly between buildings, shapes bundled in layers of wool and hide, faces hidden, breath streaming. The windows glowed amber here and there, small squares of light that seemed impossibly fragile against the coming night. You had passed the saloon, its door closed tight, though you could hear the muffled sound of voices within, men seeking warmth and company and the temporary erasure that whiskey provides. You passed the general store, dark and shuttered, its wooden sign swaying slightly in the wind. The livery stable, from which came the shuffling and occasional low sounds of horses shifting in their stalls, the scent of hay and animal warmth drifting out. The church, small and plain, with its simple cross and no bell, because bells cost money and weight in transport and were luxuries beyond reach. Each building was a declaration of human persistence, a fragile claim staked against an indifferent vastness. And you had thought, walking those frozen ruts that passed for streets, that this was what it meant to live on the margin. Not the romantic margin of myth and adventure, but the actual edge where survival was measured in small increments. Cords of firewood, pounds of flour, thickness of walls, quality of boots. You had thought of the calculations these people made daily, hourly, the constant assessment of resources against need, of time against weather, of strength against depletion. Now, in this cabin, you feel the reality of those calculations in your own body. Your feet, despite the wool socks and sturdy leather, have gone numb at the toes. Your fingers, when you flex them, move stiffly. The cold radiates up from the floorboards, seeps in through the walls, descends from the rafters. The fire pushes back against it, creates a small sphere of relative warmth, but beyond that sphere the cold waits, patient and unending. The woman stirs, reaches for the poker, and adds another piece of wood to the coals. The bark catches quickly, small flames licking up around the dry fuel, and the light in the room strengthens, pushing shadows back into the corners. She replaces the poker carefully in its place beside the hearth and settles back into her chair. Her movements are economical, practiced, containing no wasted motion. Everything here is done with that same careful efficiency, the result of understanding that energy, like wood and food, is a finite resource. My husband, she says, and her voice is quiet but clear, came out here in '63. Before the war ended, even. He heard there was land, space enough for a man to build something that was his own. He left Missouri with 2 other men, brothers, and they traveled in spring, which was the right season for it, though even spring on the trail was hard beyond anything they'd imagined. She pauses, her gaze distant, reconstructing a story she has heard many times, perhaps told many times, until it has taken on the quality of legend in her own mind. They lost one of the brothers to fever on the Platte, buried him in ground so hard they had to use a pickaxe to break the earth. The other brother wanted to turn back then, but my husband, his name was Thomas, though most called him Tom, Tom convinced him to continue. They reached this valley in late summer, and Tom said he knew the moment he saw it that this was where he would stay. The water was good, the grass tall, and there were trees enough in the hills for building. You listen, conscious that she is giving you something, a piece of her private history, and you hold yourself still so as not to disturb the flow of her telling. They filed their claims and started cutting timber. By the first snow they had a dugout finished, nothing like this cabin, just a hole in a hillside with logs across the top and sod laid over that. Dark and damp, but it kept the wind off. They lived in that dugout through the winter, the two of them, and by spring the other brother had had enough. He sold his claim to Tom for $20 and a horse, and headed back east. Tom never heard from him again. She shifts in her chair, the leather creaking softly. Tom built this cabin the next summer. Cut every log himself, notched and fitted them, chinked the gaps with mud and grass. Built the fireplace stone by stone. Hauled those stones up from the creek bed, some of them so heavy it took him half a day to move one. He was not a large man, my Tom, but he was strong in his back and his will. By the time I arrived, in the fall of '65, the cabin was finished, and he had 10 acres cleared and fenced. How did you meet him, you ask, the question emerging softly into the space between you. She looks at you directly, and in her eyes you see both warmth and a kind of dry amusement. Through correspondence, she says. My brother knew him from before the war, and when Tom wrote asking if my brother knew any women who might be willing to come west, my brother showed me the letter. I was 26 then, which was considered well past the age for marrying, and I had no prospects where I was. My father had died, my mother needed less care than before, and I wanted. She trails off, searching for the right words. I wanted to matter. I wanted to build something. So I wrote to Tom, and we exchanged 6 letters over the course of 4 months. And then I took the train as far as it ran and the stage from there, and when I arrived in town Tom was waiting with a wagon. She falls quiet again, remembering, and you can almost see it. The young woman stepping down from the dusty coach, scanning the handful of faces for one she had never seen except in her imagination, constructed from carefully written lines on paper. The man stepping forward, hat in hand, his nervousness visible in the set of his shoulders. The moment of recognition that was not recognition but decision. The choice to see in this stranger the person described in letters, to move forward into the unknown with only words as foundation. We were married by the circuit preacher 2 days later, she continues. And then Tom brought me here, to this cabin, and this has been my home for 15 years now. 15 years. You try to imagine it. 15 cycles of seasons in this place, 15 winters of cold like this, 15 springs of mud and melt, 15 summers of heat and wind, and the constant labor of coaxing life from resistant soil. 15 years of isolation, of distances measured in hard hours of travel, of community that consisted of a few scattered neighbors and the occasional gatherings in town. Were you ever sorry? You ask, and immediately wish you could retract the question, afraid it presumes too much, intrudes too deeply. But she considers it seriously, her expression thoughtful. Sorry, she repeats. No. Lonely often. Tired always. Frightened sometimes, particularly the first years when everything was strange and I did not yet know the rhythms of this place. But not sorry. Tom was a good man, steady and kind, and he never raised his voice to me, never raised his hand. We worked together, side by side, and what we built here we built together. There is satisfaction in that, a deep satisfaction that I think perhaps you cannot understand unless you have lived it. She is right, of course. You cannot fully understand, can only glimpse it through the narrow window of this single night, this brief immersion in a world that is not yours. But you are grateful for the glimpse, for the privilege of sitting in this woman's home and hearing her story, feeling the cold she has felt, tending the fire she has tended through countless long nights. He died 3 years ago, she says, and though her voice remains steady, you hear the grief beneath it, still fresh despite the passage of time. His heart gave out while he was mending fence. I found him when he did not come in for dinner. He was lying in the grass, and I thought at first he had fallen asleep, because his face was peaceful. But when I touched him I knew. The fire pops softly, and a small shower of sparks drifts upward, glowing briefly before fading to ash. The neighbors helped me bury him on the rise beyond the barn, where you can see the valley spread out below. He loved that view, would stand there in the evenings and just look out over the land. I think he felt, standing there, that he had accomplished something worth doing, that he had made his mark. You sit with this, with the image of the man buried on the hillside, his body returned to the earth he worked. You think of all the others buried in small plots and unmarked graves across this vast territory, all the individual stories of arrival and effort and ending, each one significant to those who lived it, invisible to history's broader sweep. I thought about leaving after he died, the woman says. Thought about selling the land and going back east, living with my sister in Pennsylvania. But I could not do it. This place, it holds him still. His work is in every log of this cabin, every stone of that fireplace. He cleared those fields, built those fences, dug that well. How could I leave that? How could I abandon what we made together? So she stayed and stays still, a solitary woman on a harsh frontier, maintaining the small homestead through seasons that do not soften for her solitude. You understand now why the schoolteacher spoke of her with such respect, why the people in town watch out for her, bring her supplies when the snow is too deep for her to reach them herself. She is a kind of monument, though she would never think of herself that way, a testament to endurance, to the stubborn human capacity to persist in the face of indifference. The wind gusts suddenly, a long moan that seems to come from the earth itself, and the cabin shivers slightly, the logs settling with small creaks and groans. You pull the blanket closer around your shoulders, feeling the weight of the wool, and your thoughts turn to others who have sat as you sit now, through other winter nights in other years. You think of the indigenous peoples who lived on these plains long before the settlers came, who moved with the seasons and understood the land in ways the newcomers never could. Their winter camps, their lodges built to withstand cold and wind, their intricate knowledge of how to survive in this climate without the infrastructure of towns and trade. You think of the first trappers and mountain men who ventured into these territories, following the waterways in search of beaver pelts, spending winters in remote cabins or with native tribes, learning survival or perishing in the attempt. You think of the military expeditions, soldiers in inadequate uniforms trying to maintain discipline and sanity through months of frozen isolation in crude frontier forts. You think of the miners who rushed to various strikes, digging into mountainsides and huddling in canvas tents at high altitudes where the cold could kill in hours. Each group brought their own version of civilization, their own assumptions about how to live in this place, and each had to adapt or fail. The land did not care about their intentions, their dreams, their cultural backgrounds. It presented the same challenges to all: cold, distance, scarcity, isolation. Those who survived were those who learned to read the signs. The color of the sky before a storm, the behavior of animals, the feel of the air that signaled dropping temperatures. They learned or they died, and there was no middle ground. The woman rises from her chair, moves to the small table near the wall, and returns with a tin cup and a jar. She pours water into the cup, water from the bucket that sits near the door, so cold that frost has formed on its surface, and adds a spoonful of something from the jar. "Honey," she says, stirring the mixture with a small wooden spoon. "From a neighbor who keeps bees. In winter it helps the throat, and it is something sweet in a season of plain food." She drinks slowly, and you see the slight relaxation in her shoulders, the small pleasure of the sweetness. Then she extends the cup toward you. "Share it," she says. "There is enough." You take the cup, feel its cold metal against your fingers, and drink. The water is icy, shocking against your teeth, but the honey spreads warmth through your mouth and down your throat, and the taste, floral and rich, is indeed something precious in this austere setting. You hand the cup back with a nod of thanks, and she finishes the remainder before setting it aside. Time moves strangely in this suspended space. You have no pocket watch, no clock to measure the hours, only the gradual deepening of the night and the slow consumption of the firewood. You find yourself slipping in and out of a kind of waking dream, your mind wandering through the day's experiences, through the conversations and observations, through your own memories of warmth and comfort and the easy life you left behind to make this journey. You think about the question that brought you here. Could you endure one winter night in the Old West? And you realize the question itself was flawed, because endurance is not a single act but a continuous process, a series of small adjustments and accommodations. You endure by adding wood to the fire at the right intervals, by wearing enough layers, by eating before hunger becomes weakness, by staying awake when sleep in the wrong place would mean death, by accepting discomfort as the norm rather than an aberration. But more than that, you realize that endurance requires context, requires purpose. The people who lived through these nights did so because they had no choice, because this was their life, their home, their claim on existence. They endured because the alternative was to surrender everything they had worked for, to admit defeat, to lose not just comfort but identity and meaning. You, on the other hand, endure for only this one night, with the knowledge that it will end, that you will return to your other life, that this is an experiment rather than a reality. The distinction matters. It is the difference between a test and a life, between an experience and an existence. You can endure this night because it is temporary. Could you endure a second? A 10th? A 100th? The question expands in your mind, becomes more complex and uncomfortable, because you suspect the answer is no. You suspect that without the greater purpose these people possessed, the purpose of building something, claiming something, creating a life out of raw elements, you would eventually break under the weight of this unrelenting hardness. You are thinking too much, the woman says, and you realize she has been watching you, seeing the thoughts move across your face. I can see it in your expression. You are trying to understand, trying to fit this experience into some framework that makes sense to you. You open your mouth to respond, but she raises a hand gently, stopping you. It is natural, she says. You come from a different world, a world I can only imagine from the catalogs and newspapers that reach us months late. A world of ease and plenty compared to this. You cannot help but measure this against that, cannot help but wonder how you would bear it if you had to. She leans forward slightly, her eyes holding yours. But here is what I will tell you. People are more capable than they imagine, and less capable than they pretend. If you truly had to live this life, if circumstances gave you no choice, you would probably survive it. You would adapt, because humans are adaptable creatures. You would find reserves of strength you did not know you possessed. But you would also discover limits you never had to test before. You would learn how thin the margin is between sufficiency and disaster, how quickly things can go wrong, how little it takes to tip the balance. She settles back, her point made, and you nod slowly, accepting the truth of what she says. Tom used to say, she continues, that the frontier was not a place but a condition. Not a location on a map, but a state of being in which the usual rules and comforts were stripped away and you had to rely on essentials. Your own labor, your own judgment, your own will. He said that some people thrived in that condition and others withered, and there was no predicting which you would be until you tried it. Which was he, you ask? A thriver, she says simply. He came alive out here in a way he never had been in Missouri. All his life before, he said, he had felt constrained, hemmed in by other people's expectations and established ways of doing things. Here, he could build as he chose, plant what he wanted, succeed or fail on his own merits. It suited him. And you? She considers the question, her head tilted slightly. I was neither a thriver nor a witherer, she says finally. I was someone who chose to bloom where I was planted. I adapted because I committed to adapting. I found satisfaction in small things, a successful garden, a well-made loaf of bread, a clean floor, the company of my husband in the evenings. I learned not to long for what I could not have, concerts, museums, fine dresses, easy conversation with other women, and to value what I could, the silence, the space, the sight of stars in a sky unmarred by city lights, the knowledge that what I had was earned. She pauses, then adds, though I will confess there were nights I cried for loneliness, days when the wind drove me near madness with its constancy, moments when I hated this place and everything it demanded of me. But those moments passed, as all moments do, and in the morning there was work to be done, and work is a great remedy for despair. You sit with this wisdom, this hard-earned understanding, and you feel something shift inside you, a loosening of your earlier romantic notions, a more sober appreciation for what this life actually required. The stories of the Old West that filter down through time tend to focus on drama, gunfights and gold strikes, cavalry charges and Indian raids. But the real story, you are beginning to understand, was quieter and more grinding. The story of ordinary people doing difficult work day after day, year after year, in conditions that tested every aspect of their character and constitution. The woman stands and moves to the window, peers out through the frost-etched glass into the darkness beyond. Still snowing, she reports. Steady and fine. By morning we will have 2 feet at least, maybe more. She returns to her seat, her movements slower now, fatigue evident in the set of her shoulders. You should try to sleep for a few hours, she says. I will keep the fire going. At first light, if the storm has passed, the men from town will come to check on me. They always do after a heavy snow, and you can return with them. You start to protest that she should rest, that you can tend the fire, but she waves off your concern. I am accustomed to broken sleep, she says. And truthfully, I do not sleep as well as I once did. Too many years of listening for trouble, I suppose. Tom used to joke that I could hear a mouse sneeze 3 rooms away. A flicker of smile crosses her face, brief but genuine. Sleep. You will need your strength for the cold walk back. You do not argue further. The exhaustion you have been holding at bay suddenly rolls over you like a wave, and you realize how deeply tired you are. Tired from the cold, from the long hours of alertness, from the constant subtle strain of being in an unfamiliar place. You arrange the blankets around yourself, lean back in the chair, and close your eyes. The last thing you see before sleep takes you is the woman silhouetted against the firelight, still and watchful, keeping her vigil through the winter night as she has kept it through countless nights before, alone but not defeated, enduring because endurance is what she knows how to do. You dream, though you will not remember the dreams clearly when you wake. You dream of snow falling on empty plains, of small lights scattered across vast darkness, of voices calling to each other across distances that swallow sound. You dream of walking through a landscape that shifts and changes, of arriving at destinations that dissolve as you reach them. And beneath all the dreams runs a constant thread of cold, a chill that works its way deeper and deeper, seeking the core of you. When you wake, if wake is the right word for the gradual surfacing from sleep to semi-consciousness, the quality of the darkness has changed. There is a sense of thinning, of the night having passed its deepest point and begun the slow climb toward dawn. The fire has burned lower but has not gone out. The woman has kept her promise. She sits where you last saw her, though whether she has moved in the interval you cannot know. Her eyes are open but distant, focused on something internal. You shift slightly, and the movement draws her attention. She looks at you and nods, a small acknowledgement of your return to wakefulness. Nearly morning, she says quietly. The snow has stopped. You listen and realize she is right. The susurration of falling snow has ceased, and the wind has dropped to nothing. The silence is profound, the kind of silence that comes only after a storm, when the world has been muffled and muted under a thick blanket of white. How long did I sleep? You ask, your voice rough from disuse. 3 hours, perhaps. Maybe 4. It is difficult to judge without a timepiece. You sit up slowly, feeling the stiffness in your back and shoulders, the ache of muscles held in awkward positions. Your feet have regained some feeling, though your toes still tingle with the peculiar sensation of warming flesh. The room is cold, colder than when you fell asleep, and you can see your breath hanging in the air, faint but visible. The woman rises and adds 2 more logs to the fire, coaxing the flames back to strength. The light grows, pushing against the shadows, and you can see more clearly now the details of the room. The rough-hewn beams overhead, the chinking between the logs, the few simple furnishings worn smooth by years of use. On the wall hangs a small framed photograph, and you realize with a start that you had not noticed it before. It shows a man and woman standing before this very cabin, both young and serious, the woman's hand resting lightly on the man's arm. You look from the photograph to the woman beside you, and you can see the girl she was in the face she has now, though the years have etched themselves deeply into her features. She follows your gaze and smiles slightly. Our wedding photograph, she says, taken by a traveling photographer who came through the year we were married. It cost $5, which was a fortune to us then, but Tom insisted. He said we needed something to mark the occasion, something solid and real that would last. And it has lasted, you think, this frozen moment of 2 young people at the beginning of their shared journey, unaware of what lay ahead. The work and weather, the small joys and large sorrows, the accumulation of days that would become a life. The light continues to strengthen, no longer the deep black of full night, but the gray half-light that precedes dawn. You move to the window and look out, and what you see stops your breath. The world has been transformed entirely. Snow lies deep and undisturbed, covering everything in smooth curves and soft contours. The familiar landmarks, fence posts, the path to the barn, the well, have been reduced to subtle suggestions beneath the white. The sky is clearing, stars still visible in the west, while the east shows the first pale hint of approaching day. It is beautiful, achingly beautiful, and also terrifying in its magnitude. You think of the isolation this snow represents, the way it has cut this cabin off from the town, from help, from everything beyond its immediate surroundings. You think of the animals in the barn that will need tending, of the paths that will need to be dug out, of the sheer physical labor that this pristine beauty will demand. Come, the woman says from behind you. We will have coffee and bread. By the time we have eaten, there should be light enough to see by, and you can help me break a path to the barn before the men arrive." You turn from the window and join her at the table. She has produced bread from somewhere, dense, dark bread that she slices with a large knife, and she pours coffee from a pot that has been sitting near the fire's edge. The coffee is strong and bitter, brewed from grounds that have likely been used before and will be used again, and the bread is dry and heavy, but both are warm and substantial, and you eat and drink with gratitude. As you eat, the dawn comes on steadily, light seeping into the world, and the interior of the cabin emerges from shadow. You see details you missed in the darkness: a shelf of books, not many, perhaps a dozen volumes, their spines worn from reading and rereading. A basket of wool in the corner, knitting needles thrust through a half-finished project. A calendar on the wall, its pages turned to December, several days crossed off with careful pencil marks. The small evidences of a life being lived, day by day, with attention and care. When you finish eating, the woman brings out heavy coats and scarves, hands you a pair of thick gloves that must have belonged to her husband, judging by their size and wear. She wraps herself in layers of wool and sheepskin until she is nearly shapeless, and then she opens the door. The cold rushes in like a physical force, stealing your breath, and you step out into it, following her into the transformed landscape. The snow comes up past your knees, and each step requires effort, requires lifting your leg high and pushing forward, breaking through the crust. The woman moves ahead of you with the steady determination of long practice, and you follow in her track, making your way toward the dark shape of the barn. The journey, which in summer would take perhaps 2 minutes, takes 15 now, and by the time you reach the barn door you are breathing hard, your face numb with cold, your legs burning from the exertion. The woman pulls open the door. It scrapes through the drifted snow, and you both stumble inside, into the relative warmth and close air of the barn. The animals are there: 2 cows, a few chickens roosting in the rafters, and a single horse in the far stall. They shift and low at your entrance, their breath steaming. The woman moves among them with confident efficiency, checking water. It has frozen during the night, and she breaks the ice with a hammer, and distributing hay from a mound in the corner. You help where you can, carrying water, forking hay, your movements clumsy compared to her practiced economy. When the animals have been tended, you stand for a moment in the barn's dim interior, catching your breath, and the woman looks at you with an expression that might be approval. "You do well enough," she says, "for someone unused to this work." It is, you understand, a compliment, and you accept it with a nod. You return to the cabin through the path you have broken, and the walk is slightly easier now with the track established. Inside, the woman removes her layers and hangs them to dry near the fire, and you do the same. Your fingers ache as they warm, and your cheeks burn. You feel exhausted, more exhausted than seems reasonable for such a small amount of work, and you realize how much energy the cold extracts, how much harder every task becomes when the temperature drops. The morning continues to brighten, and with the light comes the sound you have been waiting for, voices calling in the distance, and the creak and jingle of a wagon approaching. The woman moves to the door and opens it, and you see them coming. 3 men on horseback, bundled in furs and heavy coats, their breath and that of their horses streaming in the cold air. They ride up to the cabin and dismount, stomping their feet and calling greetings. The woman greets them in return, her voice warm, and they exchange words about the storm, about the depth of the snow, about who else they have checked on, and who they still need to visit. One of them produces a burlap sack and hands it to her. Supplies from town, you realize, brought out as a matter of course because they knew she would need them. And then they turn to you, taking in your presence with curiosity and welcome. The schoolteacher is among them. You recognize him despite the scarf wrapped around his face, and he explains to the others who you are and why you are here. They nod, understanding, and one of them offers you a place on his horse for the ride back to town. You turn to the woman, uncertain how to say goodbye, how to thank her for the night she has given you, for the stories and the silence, for allowing you this glimpse into her life. But she simply extends her hand, and you take it, feeling the rough strength in her grip. "Go safely," she says, "and remember what you have seen here." You promise that you will, and then you are mounting behind one of the men, settling onto the horse's broad back, your arms around the rider's waist. The group turns and begins the journey back to town, breaking trail through the deep snow, and you twist in your seat to look back one last time. The woman stands in the doorway of her cabin, a dark figure against the white landscape, her hand raised in farewell. Behind her, smoke rises from the chimney, straight and steady in the still air. And all around, the snow lies pristine and endless, beautiful and harsh. The same snow that has fallen on this place for countless winters and will fall for countless more, indifferent to human presence, to human struggle, to the small brave lights that burn against its cold expanse. You face forward again toward town, toward the return to your own time and place, but you carry the night with you. The weight of it, the truth of it, the understanding that endurance is not a single heroic act but a long quiet persistence, a choosing again and again to tend the fire, to break the path, to face another dawn and do what must be done because there is no alternative and because despite everything, the doing itself contains its own fierce reward. The cold has become a companion now, something you know in the way you know your own breath. You sit in the near darkness of the shelter you have made, listening to the wind move across the frozen land beyond these walls, and you understand that you have crossed some invisible threshold. The terror of those first hours, the panic that came with the realization of how thin the barrier stands between warmth and dying, has settled into something steadier, a kind of watchfulness that requires all of you but does not consume you. You are still here. The night continues, but so do you. The candle on the overturned crate has burned down to a thick puddle of tallow, its flame smaller now, a modest tongue of light that barely reaches the corners of the room. You have learned to read its moods. When the wind presses against the walls, the flame bends and flickers, throwing your shadow long against the rough planks. When the air stills, it straightens, burns taller, and the room feels almost warm in the amber glow it casts across your hands. You hold them near the flame, not close enough to singe, but near enough to feel the heat gather in your palms, and you think about all the fires that have kept people alive across all the centuries, all the small desperate flames nursed through winter nights by those who had nothing else. Outside, the wind has changed its song. Earlier it howled and shrieked, a wild unbroken cry that seemed to have no source and no end. Now it moves in waves, rising and falling like something breathing, and in the pauses between gusts you can hear other sounds. The creak of frozen wood, the distant crack of a branch surrendering to ice, the faint whisper of snow settling on the roof above you. These are the sounds of a world remade by cold, a landscape transformed into something stark and elemental, and you are learning its language. You shift your position slightly, careful not to disturb the makeshift insulation you have built around yourself. The blankets, the coat, the layers of clothing that trap what little warmth your body can produce. Your muscles ache from holding still for so long, from the constant low-level tension of shivering, but you know better now than to move unnecessarily. Every motion spends energy. Every motion costs heat. So you sit and you breathe and you tend the candle and you wait. The coffee tin sits empty beside you, its metal surface cold to the touch. You finished the last of the bitter liquid an hour ago, maybe two. Time has lost its usual shape, stretched and compressed by the sameness of the dark and the monotony of survival. The warmth of that coffee lives in your memory now, a ghost of comfort that your body remembers even as the actual heat has long since faded. You think about making more, about melting snow in the tin and heating it over the candle flame, but the effort seems enormous, and you are so tired, and the candle is already small, already dying. So instead you sit with the memory of warmth, and you discover that memory itself can be a kind of sustenance. You think about summer evenings, about the weight of heat on your skin, about the way the sun feels when it has been shining all day, and the earth itself becomes a source of warmth that rises through the soles of your boots. You think about sitting near a hearth in winter, the way the fire paints the room in shades of gold and copper, the way the heat presses against your face until you have to turn away. You think about waking in a warm bed, blankets heavy and soft, the cold of morning, something that exists only beyond the cocoon you have made, something you can choose to enter when you are ready. These memories are not escape. They are not fantasy or distraction. They are evidence. They are proof that warmth exists, that it will exist again, that the cold which surrounds you now is not the only truth the world contains. This is how people survive, you think. Not just by keeping the body alive, but by keeping the knowledge of other possibilities intact, by remembering that this moment, however difficult, is not forever. The wind rises again, a long sustained note that seems to come from every direction at once, and the walls around you groan with the pressure. You hear the snow driving against the western side of the structure, a sound like sand thrown against wood, relentless and fine. Somewhere above you, something shifts, a board settling, perhaps, or snow sliding across the roof, and a small cascade of dust and ice crystals falls through a gap in the ceiling, glittering briefly in the candlelight before disappearing into the shadows. You watch this small spectacle with a kind of detached wonder. Everything has become strange and vivid. The simplest phenomena, the fall of dust, the movement of a flame, the texture of wool against your skin, seem laden with significance, as though the narrowing of your world has sharpened your perception of what remains. You notice things you would never have seen before. The way the candlelight catches in the grain of the wooden crate, revealing patterns like frozen rivers. The way your breath plumes in the cold air, each exhalation a small visible ghost that rises and dissipates. The way the darkness beyond the candle's reach is not uniform but layered, shades of black and deepest blue that shift as your eyes adjust and readjust. This attention, you realize, is a form of alertness that goes beyond simple vigilance. You are not just watching for danger, though you are watching, always watching. You are bearing witness. You are present in this moment with a completeness you rarely achieve in ordinary life. When the mind scatters itself across a dozen concerns, when the present moment is always haunted by the future and the past. Here, now, there is only this. The cold, the dark, the small flame, your breathing body, the night that continues. And in this narrowed focus, you find something unexpected, a kind of clarity. The questions that seemed so urgent hours ago, the practical concerns about whether you would survive, whether the candle would last, whether the cold would penetrate your defenses, have not disappeared, but they have settled into a background hum. What rises to the foreground instead is simpler, more fundamental. You are alive. You are conscious. You are here in this room, in this body, in this moment, and that fact alone is remarkable. You think about all the winter nights that have passed since the first human beings looked up at the stars and wondered. You think about the countless people who have sat as you sit now, in shelters fragile and temporary, guarding small flames against the vastness of the cold. How many of them were terrified? How many found this same strange peace? How many discovered, as you are discovering, that the body and the mind contain resources they did not know they possessed? There is a story the old-timers tell, though you cannot remember now where you heard it or from whom. It is about a trapper who was caught in a blizzard in the mountains, far from any settlement, with no shelter and no supplies. He walked for 2 days through snow that came up to his waist, and when he could walk no further, he dug himself a cave in a drift and crawled inside. He had no fire, no blanket, nothing but the clothes on his back and the air in his lungs. He stayed in that snow cave for 3 days while the storm raged, and he stayed alive by doing nothing, by lying still, by breathing slowly, by letting his body find its own balance between the cold that surrounded him and the heat that his life produced. When the storm finally passed, he dug himself out and walked another day to reach a settlement. The people there could not believe he had survived. They looked at him as though he were a ghost, a man who should not exist. But he was not a ghost. He was a man who had discovered how far the body can go, how deep the will to live runs, how much can be endured when there is no choice but to endure. You do not know if this story is true. Perhaps it is legend, one of those tales that gets told and retold until it is smoothed and polished like a river stone, until it becomes less about fact and more about meaning. But sitting here in the cold and the dark, you understand why such stories are told. They are maps. They are evidence of the possible. They say, others have walked this path, others have faced this trial, and they came through. You can too. The candle stutters, the flame dipping low as it encounters some impurity in the tallow, and your heart clenches with a moment of fear. If the light goes out, but it steadies, the flame rising again, and you breathe out slowly, willing your pulse to calm. You have more candles. You prepared for this. When this one burns down to nothing, you will light another. You will keep lighting them, one after another, until the darkness outside begins to pale and the night releases its grip. But even as you reassure yourself, you know that each candle is a finite resource, and the night is long, and you cannot know with certainty that your preparations will be enough. This is the heart of the test, not just the endurance of cold, but the endurance of uncertainty. To sit in the dark and not know whether you have done enough, whether you will last, whether morning will come before your resources run out. To sit with that not knowing, and to keep going anyway. You adjust the blanket around your shoulders, pulling it tighter, and you feel the roughness of the wool against your neck, the weight of it across your back. Such a simple thing, a blanket. Wool sheared from sheep, cleaned and carded and spun and woven. Passed through how many hands before it came to you? Someone tended those sheep, fed them through winters, sheared them in spring. Someone cleaned the wool, worked it into thread. Someone sat at a loom and wove the threads into cloth. Someone sold it, and you bought it, and now it is here, keeping you alive. This is what you depend on, you think, the labor of others, the accumulation of human knowledge, the technologies, simple and complex, that allow survival in places that would otherwise kill you. The shelter around you is made of wood that someone cut and milled. The nails that hold it together were forged in a foundry somewhere, shaped by fire and hammer. The candle burning beside you is a product of agriculture and industry, of people who raised cattle and rendered fat and poured it into molds. Even the matches you use to light it are a marvel, a technology that would have seemed like magic to people just a few generations ago. You are not alone here, despite the isolation. You are surrounded by the evidence of human effort, human ingenuity, human care. The people who made these things did not know you. They will never know that their work kept you alive on this particular night. But they made them anyway, and you are alive because of it. This thought brings a rush of emotion that surprises you with its intensity. Gratitude, yes, but something more. A sense of connection that spans distance and time. A recognition that you are part of something larger than yourself. You are a link in a long chain, a single life in an unbroken thread that stretches back into the past and forward into the future. The people who came before you endured their own winter nights. The people who will come after you will endure theirs. And all of you, across all the years, are united by this fundamental struggle. To keep the light burning, to keep the warmth alive, to hold on through the darkness until morning comes. The wind has quieted now, falling away to a low murmur, and in the sudden comparative silence you can hear your own heartbeat, steady and strong. You place a hand over your chest and feel it there, the reliable rhythm that has continued without pause since before you were born, that will continue until the moment it stops. Your heart does not ask whether you are afraid. It does not wait for you to decide whether you can endure. It simply beats, over and over, pushing blood through your veins, keeping you alive whether you feel capable of living or not. This is the work your body does, the work you do not have to think about or will into being. Breathing, circulation, the production of heat from food, from stored fat, from the fundamental processes of cellular metabolism. Your body is fighting for you, has been fighting for you all night, will continue to fight as long as it can. And your task is simpler than you thought, not to survive through strength of will alone, but to support the body's work, to give it what it needs, shelter, warmth, fuel, rest, and to trust it to do what it has evolved over millennia to do. You think about the generations that shaped this body you inhabit. Your ancestors, going back not just years but centuries, millennia, survived cold winters, hot summers, famines, floods, predators, diseases, all the myriad dangers that could end a life before it produced another life. Every single one of your ancestors, going back to the beginning, survived long enough to reproduce. Every single one passed on their genes, and those genes contain the wisdom of survival, the accumulated adaptations of countless generations. You carry that wisdom in your cells. Your body knows how to conserve heat, how to prioritize blood flow to essential organs, how to shiver to generate warmth, how to slow its metabolism when resources are scarce. It knows how to endure. And sitting here in the cold and the dark, you are doing what your ancestors did. You are lasting through the night, and that is enough. The candle is very small now, a stub no taller than your thumb, and you know you will need to light another soon. You reach for the bundle of candles you set aside earlier, your fingers stiff and clumsy with cold, and you select one and unwrap it from its paper. The new candle is pale and smooth, the wick at its center dark and straight. You hold it ready, waiting for the moment when the current candle burns low enough that you can light the new one from its flame. This is a delicate operation, requiring timing and steadiness. You cannot let the old candle go out before the new one is lit, but you also cannot light the new one too soon, wasting precious light. You watch the flame, judging its height, its steadiness, and when it seems right, you lean forward and tip the new candle's wick into the fire. For a moment nothing happens, and you feel the familiar clutch of fear. What if it does not light? What if the wick is damp? What if? But then the flame catches, a small bright bloom of light that grows as it climbs the fresh wick, and you pull the new candle back and set it upright in the tallow that has pooled around the old one. The room brightens. The new candle burns taller, stronger, its flame pure and steady, and you feel a surge of relief and accomplishment that is out of all proportion to the simplicity of the act. You lit a candle. That is all. But in this moment, in this place, it feels like a victory. You let the old candle burn itself out, the last of its tallow feeding the final guttering moments of its flame. And then it is gone, a small twist of smoke rising from the blackened wick. It served its purpose. It kept the darkness at bay for as long as it could. Now it is the new candle's turn, and after this one, another, and another, until either the night ends or the candles run out. But you have enough. You have counted them, rationed them, planned for the long hours. You have enough. You settle back into your position, drawing the blankets close, and you return to the work of waiting. This is the truth of survival. You think, it is not dramatic, not heroic in the way stories make it seem. It is repetitive, monotonous, uncomfortable. It is cold and tired and sore, and it goes on, hour after hour, with no guarantee of success and no respite except the small moments of relief when you light a new candle, or take a sip of water, or shift position enough to ease an aching muscle. But within that monotony, there is something else. A kind of meditation. A stripping away of everything extraneous until only the essential remains. You are not worried about tomorrow's work, about the debts you owe, about the arguments you had or the plans you made. You are not thinking about who you are supposed to be or how you are perceived or what you will do with your life. You are simply here, in this body, in this moment, doing what must be done. And in this enforced simplicity, you find a strange kind of freedom. The world has narrowed to the size of this room, and within this small circle of light, you are enough. You do not have to be more than you are. You do not have to prove yourself or achieve anything except continuation. You simply have to be, breath after breath, heartbeat after heartbeat, through the long cold night. The wind has risen again, but it does not frighten you as it did before. It is simply weather, air in motion, the atmosphere doing what it does. The walls around you creak and shift, but they hold. They have held all night, and they will hold until morning. You trust this now in a way you did not at the beginning. You have tested the shelter with your fear and your doubt, and it has not failed you. Outside, the storm continues its work, reshaping the land, covering everything in white, erasing the marks that people have made, and leaving the world clean and new and utterly indifferent to human concerns. The cold does not care whether you survive. The wind does not notice your presence. The night will pass at its own pace, neither hurrying nor slowing for your sake. And there is something clarifying in this indifference, something that puts your own life in perspective. You are small. Your struggles are small. In the vast span of time, in the immensity of the universe, this night, this cold, this fear, this endurance, will leave no mark. It will be forgotten as soon as it is over, lost in the endless succession of days and nights that stretch behind and ahead. But that does not make it meaningless. To you, in this moment, it is everything. And perhaps that is the lesson. That life is made of these small private struggles, these moments of quiet endurance that no one else will know about or remember. That meaning does not require grandeur or permanence. That simply to be here, to continue, to tend the small flame and wait for morning is enough. You think about the town you passed through on your way to this place, the people in their houses, sleeping in their beds, warm and safe and unaware of your solitary vigil. By morning they will wake and go about their lives, never knowing that you spent the night here, never knowing what you endured. And that is as it should be. This night is yours. The knowledge of it is yours. And you will carry it with you, a secret strength, a memory of what you are capable of when there is no other choice. The candle burns. The wind blows. The cold presses close. And you sit at the center of it all, a small warm creature guarding a small warm flame, and you endure. Time passes, though you could not say how much. The night has lost all sense of progression. There is no longer a feeling of moving towards something, of the darkness thinning or the cold relenting. There is only now, extended and eternal, the same moment repeating itself over and over. You sit. You breathe. You watch the flame. You wait. But even in this sameness, there are small changes. Your body has adapted to the cold, finding a kind of equilibrium. The shivering has become less violent, more of a constant low tremor that generates heat without exhausting you. Your mind has grown quieter, less prone to panic or spiraling thoughts. You have entered a state of deep patience, a kind of hibernating alertness where you are both present and withdrawn, awake but resting. And in this state, memory comes unbidden. You think about other winters, other cold nights. You remember being a child, waking in the night to find snow falling outside the window, the world transformed into something magical and strange. You remember the way the cold air felt on your face when you stepped outside, the shock of it, the way it made you gasp and laugh. You remember building fires with your family, the ritual of it, stacking kindling, striking the match, nursing the first flames until they caught and spread. You remember the warmth of those fires, the way everyone gathered around them, the way they became the center of the house, the heart of the home. These memories are tender and painful at once. They belong to a time when cold was a discomfort, not a danger. When winter was a season to be endured, yes, but also to be enjoyed. Snow to play in, hot drinks to savor, the coziness of being inside while the storm raged outside. Now, sitting in this makeshift shelter with only a candle between you and the fatal cold, winter reveals its other face. The ancient threat, the killing force, the season that tests whether you deserve to survive. But even in this extremity, there is beauty. You look at the patterns the candlelight makes on the walls, the way the shadows shift and dance. You listen to the wind and hear in it the voice of something vast and inhuman, something that existed long before people and will exist long after. You feel the cold and recognize it as part of the world's truth, neither good nor evil, simply what is. To survive winter is to accept the world as it is, you think. Not as you wish it to be, not as you think it should be, but as it actually is, beautiful and brutal, nurturing and deadly, indifferent to your preferences and immune to your protests. The cold does not negotiate. It does not make exceptions. It simply is, and you must meet it on its own terms or perish. And yet people do survive. People have survived for thousands of years in climates far harsher than this, in places where winter lasts half the year and the cold can kill in minutes. They survive through knowledge and community, through technology and adaptation, through sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. And you are heir to all that accumulated wisdom, all that hard-won knowledge. The shelter you sit in, the candle you burn, the clothes you wear, all of it is legacy, all of it is gift. You pull the blanket tighter and close your eyes for a moment, not sleeping but resting them, and behind your eyelids you see the afterimage of the candle flame, a ghost of light that persists even in darkness. And you think, this is what we do. We make light. We make warmth. We push back against the darkness and the cold, not because we can defeat them, but because we must. Because the alternative is surrender, and something in us refuses to surrender. When you open your eyes again, the candle seems brighter, or perhaps your vision has simply adjusted. The room feels smaller, more intimate, a pocket of warmth and light in the vast cold night. And you feel a shift inside yourself, subtle but unmistakable. The fear has not disappeared. It will never fully disappear, but it has been transformed. It has become something you can carry, something you can live with. You have been tested, and you are still here. The night is not over, but you have come this far, and that counts for something. That counts for everything. The wind sighs around the walls of your shelter, a long, slow exhalation, and you match it with your own breath, slow and steady, and you settle deeper into the stillness, into the waiting, into the long, patient work of lasting through the dark. Morning will come. You believe this now. Not because you have earned it or because you deserve it, but because morning always comes. The earth turns, indifferent and reliable, and the sun rises whether you are here to see it or not. Your task is simply to remain, to keep the candle lit, to keep breathing, until the darkness pales and the long night ends. And you will. You will remain. You will endure. This is your promise to yourself, sitting in the cold and the dark. You will last until morning. However long the night, however deep the cold, you will not give up. You will tend the flame and guard the warmth and wait with whatever patience you can summon. And when the sun rises, you will be here to see it. The candle burns. Time passes. And you sit at the center of your small circle of light, a solitary vigil, a quiet act of defiance against the cold and the dark, and you endure. The first trace of true dawn arrives not as light, but as a subtle shift in the quality of darkness, a thinning of the black that has pressed against the windows through all these long hours. You sit very still in your chair near the stove, wrapped in the wool blanket that has become almost part of you now, and you watch this change occur with the attention of someone who has learned, in a single night, to read the language of small transformations. The fire in the stove has burned down to a bed of coals once more, glowing with that deep orange light that seems less like illumination than like warmth made visible. You do not rush to add more wood. There will be time for that. The cabin holds enough heat now that the cold no longer presses quite so urgently at every surface, and you have learned the rhythm of tending this small controlled flame, learned how to read its needs in the color of the coals and the sound of the settling wood. This knowledge feels both new and ancient, as though you have always known it and are only now remembering. Outside, the wind has diminished to something almost gentle, a steady breath rather than the howling force that battered the walls earlier in the night. You can hear it moving through the snow-laden branches of the trees, a sound like distant water, and beneath that the occasional soft thump of snow sliding from pine boughs, released by some shift in temperature or angle that you cannot see but can imagine perfectly. The world is still wrapped in winter, still held in that deep cold that defines this season and this place, but there is something different in the air now, some quality that speaks of endurance met and crisis past. You think about the hours that have brought you to this moment, the long, slow progression from confident arrival to desperate struggle to quiet acceptance to something harder to name. This state you find yourself in now, tired beyond measure but strangely alert, aware of your body and the cabin and the waiting dawn in ways that feel almost too vivid, too immediate. You have passed through the hardest part of the night, that stretch between midnight and the first hint of morning when the cold is deepest and the darkness most complete, when every small sound becomes significant and every draft finds its way beneath your layers. And you have come through it not unscathed but intact, still here, still capable of thought and observation and the small careful actions that sustain life. The lamp on the table has burned through most of its oil. The flame has guttered down to a small bright point that wavers slightly with your breath, casting shadows that seem thinner now, less substantial, as though they know their time is ending. You consider extinguishing it to save what little fuel remains, but you leave it burning. There is something comforting in this small light, this proof of human presence and human will in the face of all that indifferent cold and darkness. It has been your companion through the night, this tiny controlled fire, and you will let it burn as long as it wishes. Your legs are stiff when you finally stand, your muscles protesting the long hours of sitting and the deep cold that has worked its way into your joints despite all your efforts. You move slowly, deliberately, crossing the few feet to the window with the careful steps of someone who has learned not to waste warmth on unnecessary movement. The frost on the glass has grown even thicker through the night, fantastical patterns of ice that refract the lamplight into dozens of tiny gleams and sparkles. You raise one hand and press your palm against the cold surface, feeling the chill bite through your skin, and hold it there until your warmth begins to melt the frost beneath your touch. A small clear spot emerges, expanding slowly outward from the center of your palm. Through it you can see the yard beyond the cabin, still deep in shadow, but no longer completely dark. The snow that fell earlier has stopped, and the surface of the drifts is smooth and unmarked, a perfect white that seems to hold its own luminescence, as though it has captured some quality of starlight or moonlight and keeps it even as those lights fade. The shapes of things are becoming visible now. The dark mass of the woodpile, the posts of the fence marching away into the dimness, the black verticals of tree trunks rising from the white ground. It is still too dark to see color or fine detail, but the world is returning, emerging from the night like something surfacing from deep water. You stand there for a long time, your hand pressed to the cold glass, watching this transformation occur degree by degree. There is no single moment when night becomes day, you realize. It is a process, a gradual shift that happens so slowly that you cannot mark the exact instant of change, but can only observe that what was dark is becoming less dark, that the black is turning to deep blue, that the stars that were so bright earlier are now fading to faint points that wink out one by one as the sky brightens behind them. The wind stirs again outside, a little stronger now, and you watch it lift snow from the surface of the drifts in thin white veils that swirl and settle and rise again. It is a sight you have seen 100 times in your imagination, in paintings and photographs and stories, but seeing it in reality is different in ways you could not have anticipated. There is a weight to it, a presence, a sense of forces moving according to their own logic that has nothing to do with human wishes or needs. This is what the Old West was, you think, not the gunfights and the gold rushes, not the legends and the larger-than-life figures, but this, the simple, brutal reality of weather and distance, of cold that could kill and isolation that could break the spirit, of long nights endured in small shelters while the winter world raged outside. Behind you, the stove ticks softly as the metal cools and contracts. You turn away from the window, letting the frost close over the clear spot your hand made, and move to add more wood to the coals. The routine is familiar now, almost automatic. Open the door carefully, select 2 pieces of split pine from the box, place them just so on the glowing coals, adjust them slightly as the first flames begin to lick upward. The wood is dry and catches quickly, and soon the fire is burning bright again, filling the cabin with its warm orange light and the clean scent of burning pine. You return to your chair and settle into it with a small sigh that is part exhaustion and part something else. Satisfaction, perhaps, or simple gratitude for this warmth and shelter, for having come through the night and reached this threshold hour when the darkness begins to retreat. Your body aches in a dozen places. Your eyes feel gritty from lack of sleep and from the dry air and the constant vigilance of watching and tending and staying aware. Your hands are chapped despite your gloves, and your throat is scratchy from breathing cold air. These discomforts are real and immediate, but they feel manageable now, finite, no longer the overwhelming threat they seemed in the depths of the night. You pull the blanket more closely around your shoulders and let your gaze rest on the stove, on the fire visible through the small opening in the door. The flames dance and curl around the wood, blue at the base and orange higher up, moving with that hypnotic fluidity that can hold attention for hours if you let it. You think about all the people who have sat as you sit now, watching fires through long winter nights in cabins like this one, scattered across the vast expanse of the Western Territories. Homesteaders and ranchers, prospectors and trappers, widows and bachelors and families huddled together against the cold, each one engaged in this same simple struggle to stay warm and stay alive until morning comes. Their names are mostly lost now, their individual stories forgotten or reduced to bare facts and census records and land claims. But their presence remains somehow, woven into the fabric of this place, embodied in the worn wood of the cabin walls and the stones of the fireplace and the careful construction of this stove that has kept you alive through the night. They understood something that you are only beginning to grasp, that survival in this landscape required a particular kind of attention, a willingness to subordinate everything else to the immediate demands of cold and isolation, to measure life not in grand achievements, but in small successful actions. Fire maintained, water kept from freezing, breath continuing to rise in clouds of condensation that prove you are still here, still present, still persisting. The sky beyond the frosted windows continues to lighten, moving from deep blue to a paler shade that holds hints of gray, and, just beginning, the faintest suggestion of rose along what you judge to be the eastern horizon. True dawn is still perhaps half an hour away, but the night is clearly ending, surrendering its hold on the world 1 minute at a time. You find yourself thinking about what will come next, the full arrival of daylight, the moment when you will open the cabin door and step out into the transformed landscape, when you will see clearly the place that has been only shadows and suggestions for so many hours. Part of you wants to rush toward that moment, to fling open the door now and greet the approaching dawn as though your eagerness could summon it faster. But you remain seated, patient, understanding in some instinctive way that this threshold time deserves its own attention, its own recognition. You have spent the night learning to endure, learning the discipline of measured action and careful preservation of resources, and it would be a betrayal of that learning to abandon it now when the crisis has passed. The dawn will come in its own time. You can wait. The lamp flame wavers and grows smaller. You glance over and see that the oil reservoir is nearly empty, only a thin layer of fuel remaining at the bottom. The wick draws up what it can, but the flame is starving now, shrinking minute by minute. You watch it grow smaller and smaller, a bright point in the growing daylight, until finally it flickers one last time and goes out, leaving only a thin trail of smoke that rises in the still air and disperses against the ceiling. The loss of the lamp's light is barely noticeable. The cabin is bright enough now from the fire and from the growing dawn outside that you can see everything clearly. The table and chair, the cabinet against the wall, the pegs where your coat hangs, the details of wood grain, and the dark spots where knots have fallen out over the years. The shadows are still present, but no longer dominant, no longer the deep pools of darkness that define the space for so many hours. They are only shadows now, natural and ordinary, the way they would be on any morning in any place. You think about the simple mathematics of survival that have governed this night. The amount of wood in the pile outside, the hours of darkness to be endured, the heat generated by burning wood measured against the cold seeping in through walls and windows and floor, the food you brought converted to energy, the water to hydration, the layers of clothing to insulation. All of it balanced on an equation that could have tipped either way, toward survival or toward the slow cold death that claimed so many in this era, in cabins like this one, on nights like this one when the temperature dropped and the wind rose and the world became a place of pure elemental force indifferent to human presence. But you have survived. The equation has balanced in your favor, tilted by your preparations and your actions, and perhaps by simple good fortune. The cabin has held. The stove has functioned. The wood has burned. The blanket has insulated. Your body has generated heat, and your mind has maintained the discipline to keep feeding the fire and staying awake and not giving in to the seductive ease of simply letting the cold take you. In a few hours, this night will become a story you tell. The time you spent a winter night in an Old West cabin, the cold you endured, the fears you felt and mastered. You will describe the howling wind and the frost on the windows and the small warm sphere of safety created by the stove's heat. You will talk about the darkness and the stars and the strange alertness that comes from not sleeping while the body desperately wants to rest. And those who listen will nod and say they understand, and perhaps they will, in the abstract way that stories allow. But you know that something will be lost in the telling, some essential quality of the experience that cannot quite be captured in words. The bone-deep cold that makes your teeth ache. The way time stretches and compresses simultaneously. Hours crawling past while the whole night seems to vanish in an instant. The peculiar clarity that comes from extended focus on simple tasks. The way the world narrows to fire and warmth and the small sphere of shelter, while everything beyond that sphere becomes foreign and almost incomprehensible. The profound aloneness of being the only conscious human presence in a landscape of cold and darkness, and the equally profound connection to all the others who have sat where you sit and watched fires like the one you watch and waited as you wait for dawn to come. These things live in the body and the immediate moment. They resist translation. They exist in the space between thought and sensation, in the accumulated weight of hours and decisions and small endurances that add up to survival. You have learned them tonight, written them into your muscles and nerves through direct experience, and they will stay with you in ways that book knowledge never could. The eastern sky is definitely brighter now, the rose color spreading and deepening along the horizon. You can see the silhouettes of distant hills or mountains, dark shapes against the brightening sky, their contours becoming visible for the first time since sunset yesterday. The landscape is revealing itself, assembling out of darkness into coherent form, and you watch this process with the attention it deserves, understanding that you are witnessing something fundamental, something that has happened every morning since the beginning of time, but which feels, in this moment, like a small miracle. You stand again and move to the window, pressing your face close to the cold glass. The frost has thinned slightly in the growing warmth inside the cabin, and you can see through it more clearly now. The yard is still deep in snow, but the drifts have a different quality in this early light, their surfaces catching the first pink rays of the coming sun and holding them like scattered gems. The fence posts cast long blue shadows across the white surface. A small bird, you cannot tell what kind, lands on one of the posts, a dark shape against the pale snow, and sits for a moment before flying off again, its wings beating rapidly as it disappears into the trees. Life persists. This is what the small bird tells you. Life persists through the cold and the darkness and the brutal indifference of winter. It finds ways to continue, to endure, to wait out the hardest hours and greet the dawn when it comes. The bird does not celebrate its survival or reflect on the difficulty of the night just past. It simply is, simply continues, simply moves from moment to moment with the unconscious grace of a creature perfectly adapted to its environment. You envy that grace even as you recognize that your own survival has required something different. Consciousness, planning, the ability to imagine future cold and prepare for it, to maintain focus and discipline through long hours when instinct would have you sleep or panic or give up. The human way is harder in some respects, requiring this constant vigilance and this endless calculation of resources and risks. But it has brought you through the night, and that is enough. Behind you, the fire burns steadily in the stove, filling the cabin with warmth that now feels almost luxurious after so many hours of careful rationing. You allow yourself to open the damper slightly, to let the fire burn a bit hotter now that the worst has passed. The flames respond immediately, growing brighter and taller, and the heat increases perceptibly. You stand before the stove and let that heat wash over you, feeling it penetrate your clothes and warm your skin and finally, gradually, begin to drive the deep cold from your core. Your hands are the first to truly warm, the blood flowing back into your fingers with a tingling sensation that is almost painful. You flex them slowly, working the stiffness out, watching the white pressure marks on your palms fade to pink as circulation returns. Then your arms, your shoulders, your chest, each part of your body slowly relinquishing the cold it has held through the night, slowly remembering what warmth feels like, what it means to not have every muscle tensed against the chill. You close your eyes and simply stand there, absorbing heat, feeling your body begin to relax in ways you hadn't even realized it was tense. Your jaw unclenches. Your shoulders drop slightly. Your breathing deepens and slows. The constant low-level vigilance that has kept you alert through the night begins to ease. And with its easing comes a wave of exhaustion, so profound that you have to put one hand on the back of the chair to steady yourself. But you do not sit yet. You remain standing, swaying slightly, riding out this wave of tiredness and letting it pass through you without surrendering to it. There will be time to rest soon, time to sleep in true safety once the sun is fully up and the day established. For now, you need to remain present, to see this night through to its proper conclusion, to witness the dawn that you have earned through your endurance. The sky continues to brighten, moving through shades of rose and gold into a pale luminous blue that seems to emanate its own light. The stars have vanished completely now, washed away by the approaching sun. The world is suspended in that peculiar moment between night and day when anything seems possible, when the events of the darkness just past feel both immediate and impossibly distant, when the mind is clear and strange from lack of sleep and everything takes on a sharpness, a clarity, that ordinary waking life rarely possesses. You think about all the winter dawns that have broken over this landscape, thousands upon thousands of them, each one witnessed by someone. A Cheyenne woman emerging from a teepee to check on horses, a prospector stumbling out of a mountain claim, a child peering from the window of a sod house on the Nebraska plains, a cowboy riding night watch and seeing the eastern sky begin to pale. All of them connected across time by this shared experience of having survived the night, of having persisted through darkness and cold into another day. Their lives were so different from yours in almost every particular. The work they did, the dangers they faced, the technologies they possessed or lacked, the expectations they held for their futures. But in this one thing you are united. You know what they knew, have felt what they felt, have passed through the same trial of endurance, and emerged on the other side still breathing, still thinking, still capable of appreciation for the simple gift of warmth and shelter and the promise of daylight. This knowledge feels important somehow, though you would struggle to articulate exactly why. Perhaps it is simply that it connects you to history in a way that reading never could, makes those distant figures real in your imagination as they have never been before. They are not characters in a story anymore but fellow survivors, people who understood in their bodies and bones what you now understand, who would recognize immediately in your face and posture the telltale signs of a night spent feeding a fire and fighting cold and waiting for dawn. A sound outside draws your attention, a soft creaking noise that you cannot immediately identify. You move to the window and look out, scanning the brightening landscape for movement. At first you see nothing unusual, just the snow and the fence and the dark mass of trees beyond. Then you notice one of the trees at the edge of the clearing, a large pine that leans slightly to the south. As you watch, a portion of the snow accumulated on its branches slides free with a soft rushing sound and falls to the ground below, raising a small white cloud that drifts and settles. The tree sways slightly, released from the weight, and more snow falls in a cascading series of small avalanches that run from branch to branch until the entire tree has shed its burden and stands dark green against the white landscape. It is a small thing, this falling snow, a minor event in the vast scope of natural processes. But it fills you with an inexplicable joy, a sudden lift of the heart that is entirely out of proportion to what you are witnessing. Perhaps it is simply exhaustion making you emotionally volatile. Perhaps it is the relief of having survived. Perhaps it is the beauty of the moment. The dark tree against white snow against blue sky, the graceful fall of the snow and the gentle swaying of the branches, the sense of the world waking and shaking itself free of the night's accumulation. Or perhaps it is something deeper, some recognition that you have participated in something ancient and ongoing, that you have added your own small story to the vast accumulated narrative of human survival in harsh places, that you have proven to yourself something you did not know you needed to prove, that you could endure, that you could persist, that you could meet the challenge of this landscape and this night and not be found wanting. The sun breaks the horizon. It happens so quickly after all the slow, gradual brightening that it catches you by surprise. One moment the sky is pale and luminous but empty. The next, a brilliant sliver of gold appears at the edge of the world, so bright that you have to squint against it. The sliver grows, becoming a semicircle, then a three-quarter circle, then the full perfect disk of the sun rising into a clear winter sky. The light that precedes it races across the landscape like something alive. You watch it come toward the cabin, see it touch the tops of the distant hills first, and then flow down their slopes, turning snow blue-white and making the trees throw long dark shadows westward. It reaches the fence posts, and they seem to ignite, their caps of snow glowing as though lit from within. It floods the yard and touches the cabin wall, and suddenly the frost on the windows erupts into brilliance, every crystal catching and refracting the light into rainbows and starbursts. And then it reaches you. The sunlight pours through the frost-patterned window and falls across your face, and you close your eyes and turn into it like a plant seeking light. The warmth of it is negligible. The sun is too low, the air too cold, for its heat to carry much force yet. But the light itself feels like a physical presence, like a touch, like a benediction. You stand in it and let it wash over you and feel something in your chest unlock, some tension you have carried not just through this night, but perhaps for much longer. Some deep uncertainty about your own capacity to endure difficulty and discomfort. You have endured. This is what the sunlight tells you. You have endured, and you are here, and the night is past, and you have won this small, crucial victory over cold and darkness and fear. When you finally open your eyes again, the cabin is filled with light. It streams through every window, reflecting off the white walls and the snow visible outside, filling the small space with a luminous glow that seems almost supernatural after so many hours of lamplight and firelight and darkness. You can see dust motes floating in the sunbeams, tiny particles that drift and turn and catch the light. You can see the true colors of things now, the warm brown of the wooden table, the gray wool of the blanket around your shoulders, the black iron of the stove with its patches of rust and soot. The world has returned. The normal laws of sight and space and time have reasserted themselves. The strange compressed reality of the long night has given way to the familiar dimensions of day. You are simply yourself again, a person in a cabin in the mountains in winter, tired and cold and hungry, but alive and whole and possessed of new knowledge that sits quietly in your mind like a treasure you have not yet fully examined. You move through the cabin slowly, performing small tasks with the dreamlike deliberation that comes from extreme fatigue. You add more wood to the stove, building up the fire to take full advantage of the day's heat. You drink the last of the water from the pitcher, and then put on your coat and your gloves and open the door to step outside and fill the pitcher again from the snow. The cold when you step over the threshold is shocking, a slap of air so frigid it makes you gasp. But it is different from the cold of the night somehow, cleaner, brighter, less malevolent. It is simply cold, a fact of the season and the altitude, something to be managed and endured but not feared. The sun is above the horizon now, climbing steadily into the perfect blue of the morning sky, and its light pours over everything with that particular clarity that comes only in winter, when the air is scrubbed clean by cold, and there is no haze to soften the edges of things. You stand in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. The pristine snow unmarked except for the tracks of small animals, rabbits, you think, and perhaps a fox. The smoke rising straight up from the chimney in a thin white column until it reaches some higher layer of air and spreads and dissipates. The mountains visible in the distance, their peaks brilliant white against the dark blue of the sky. The silence, vast and complete, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the occasional soft sound of snow falling from trees. This is what they saw, you think. This is the morning they greeted after their own long nights of cold and darkness. This beauty, this harshness, this landscape that offers no compromise and no mercy, but which, in its own way, in its own fierce terms, allows for life to persist and even sometimes to flourish. You fill the pitcher with clean snow and carry it back inside, shutting the door firmly behind you. The warmth of the cabin envelopes you immediately, welcome and familiar now. You set the pitcher near the stove to melt and shrug out of your coat and gloves and hang them on their pegs. Then you return to your chair and lower yourself into it with a long sigh that releases some final portion of the night's tension. The fire burns steadily. The sun shines through the windows. The cabin holds its warmth and performs its function. Simple shelter, simple safety, simple persistence against the forces that would undo it. These things are enough. This is enough. You are here, you have endured, and the day stretches before you full of ordinary possibilities. Your eyes grow heavy. You pull the blanket around yourself and settle more deeply into the chair, your gaze fixed on the fire through the small opening in the stove door. The flames dance and curl, hypnotic in their movement, and you watch them with the detached attention of someone who has earned the right to rest. You think about sleep, about surrendering finally to the exhaustion that pulls at every muscle and nerve. But not yet. Not quite yet. There is something you want to hold on to for just a few minutes more. This feeling of having passed through difficulty into peace. This clarity that comes from having tested yourself and not been found wanting. This quiet gratitude for warmth and shelter and the simple continuing fact of your own existence. Outside, the day continues to establish itself. The sun climbs higher. The snow begins to glitter and sparkle as the light strengthens. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls. 3 clear notes that carry in the cold air and fade and come again. Life reasserting itself, continuing its ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human drama that is played out in this cabin through the night. And inside, you sit in your chair by the stove, wrapped in wool, warmed by fire, held in this moment that exists between effort and rest, between night and day, between the person you were when darkness fell, and the person you will be when you finally rise and step out into the transformed world beyond these walls. You close your eyes just for a moment. The warmth enfolds you. The fire whispers and cracks. Your breathing slows and deepens. And in this small protected space, you rest. You rest knowing that you could endure one winter night in the Old West. Not easily, not without cost, but you could endure. You did endure. And that knowledge, hard-won and honest, will stay with you through all the nights to come. The fire burns on. The sun climbs higher. The day opens before you like a gift. And you rest,